stations here in about 5 minutes, and at that point we will begin feeding what we have on our radio transmitters to the American Forces Radio and Television Service in Los Angeles by way of our parent organization in Frankfurt, West Germany, the American Forces Network Europe. The radio broadcast will be distributed around the world so that others, just like yourselves, may at least hear what's going on. Locally, we will have live television coverage, and if I can explain to you how all of that is coming about, the local television operation of the First German Broadcast Network, SFB, Radio Free Berlin, they are providing television coverage for the world live. That coverage is being provided to ARD, which is the parent organization of SFB. That's the First German Television Network. They, in turn, ARD, is providing live coverage for the American commercial networks and other non-American broadcast operations. And the commercial networks in the States are operating with a pool, and ABC, the American broadcasting companies, they have the pool for this particular coverage. So we are getting that signal. It's the same one that you'll see on German television. German television, of course, operates on the PAL system. We operate on the NTSC system. So that signal is being translated to our standards through the ABC conversion system located at Tempelhof Central Airport, and that's how you're getting it here. So you will see and hear President Reagan arriving, walking around, and speaking at Tempelhof Airport and also at Palace Charlottenburg Palace, the Baroque castle in the city where so many dignitaries go for those special events. So those are some of the things that we will be doing today. This whole trip, the itinerary, has been rather sketchy for security reasons, so it is a play-it-by-ear affair. It is speculated that President Reagan will go to Checkpoint Charlie and will talk with a soldier there and will witness some of the interesting things that attract tourists from all over the world to Checkpoint Charlie. He'll be doing that. And that happens between his landing at Tempelhof Air Base and his reception at Charlottenburg Palace. At Charlottenburg, he will be treated to a West Berlin Volksfest, and he will meet and speak with the mayor. We talked to the mayor last night in his office as all of us were burning the midnight oil, and the mayor said he and Mr. Reagan will speak together at Charlottenburg Palace, and we will provide coverage of that. Mr. Reagan speaking in English. The mayor said he will be speaking in German, and there will be translation of that. So those are some of the things coming up. On radio right now, we have a special presentation done by Airman Gage Mace, and as soon as we conclude that, we will be going to joint coverage on AFN Radio and Television. So stay tuned now for live coverage of President Reagan's visit in Berlin. From West Berlin, Germany, it's live coverage of the visit of President Ronald Reagan. Ladies and gentlemen, it's about 9:35 right now here in West Berlin. West Berlin beginning coverage of this portion of the President's European visit. As all of us were getting out of bed early this morning, scurrying to our places of work and covering this big event, a colleague of me said to me that Mr. Reagan perhaps is bringing with him a bit of sunshine. Here in West Berlin, for the past couple of weeks, we've had unseasonably warm weather with lots of sunshine. For the past couple of days, though, it's been cloudy and rather cool. This morning, the sun is up, the skies are blue, and weather forecasters are calling for fair to partly cloudy skies for this day of President Reagan's visit here in West Berlin. I'm Army Sergeant Monty Jones in the AFN Broadcast Center here in West Berlin. Fellow broadcast journalists are located at a couple of fixed points in the city. And to those of you around the world, you may recognize their names from other places you may have heard or seen them. At Tempelhof Air Base, where Mr. Reagan and his party will arrive very shortly, is Specialist Kyle King and Airman Jerry Cormier. Later, we'll switch to West Berlin's Charlottenburg Palace, Air Force Sergeant Rick Delisle and Specialist Peter Dole covering that part of the Reagan visit, and we'll have live coverage of the President's visit to the Berlin Wall. During the course of this live presidential visit in West Berlin, we'll offer also a couple of thumbnail sketches of places Mr. Reagan will see. We have a couple of guests we think you will find rather interesting, and one is the Washington, D.C. correspondent for the first national television service in West Germany, Lothar Löwe, and of course the West German television broadcasts are seen here in West Berlin. The other guest we have is a director of the Chamber of Commerce in West Berlin. His name is Bob Lochner. He has served as translators for many visiting dignitaries, including the late Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. As we said once before, we talked with the governing mayor of West Berlin, Dr. Richard von Weizsäcker, last night, and he had some rather interesting things to say about the visit to West Germany and to West Berlin by President Reagan. And all of those things are coming up later. We'll be hearing from Mayor von Weizsäcker, and we'll have our two studio guests, Bob Lochner from the Chamber of Commerce and Lothar Löwe, who is the Washington correspondent for the first German television service, ARD. He'll be joining us. Bob Lochner appeared on German television the other day in West Germany and had some interesting things to say about past presidents that he has been translator for, and hopefully Bob will tell us a couple of those things when he comes by later. Kyle King, Jerry Cormier, Rick Delisle, and Peter Dole covering the visit of the president. One of the hitchings that we had with covering this was the fact that we didn't know for a long time where the president was going to visit the wall, and no live coverage was planned. It looks as though now he will be going to Checkpoint Charlie. Checkpoint Charlie is the only access point Americans and non-Germans have in going into East Berlin. The president is scheduled to go there and to talk with a soldier at that checkpoint, and we plan live coverage of that. We are awaiting our transmission from Tempelhof Air Base and our reporters out there. So if we might, let's move along to one of our reports, and that one deals with the Tempelhof Air Base, and that's where our first report will come from. Kyle King is out there, and he put together a thumbnail sketch of the whole thing. And he told me on the telephone earlier that while he waits for the president to arrive and he looks around to see all the people standing there, it's hard for him to imagine, and probably for the rest of us, hard to imagine that this huge airport was not always an airport, and that an aeronautical pioneering event took place there earlier.
Located today on what was a parade and exercise field from the time of Soldier King Frederick the Great until the time of Germany's last Kaiser. It was here at Berlin's Tempelhof Air Base location that the Wright brothers in 1908 set a 19-minute flight. Tempelhof Airport was officially opened in 1923. A new terminal and other airport facilities were constructed in the 1930s in a building showing the form of an eagle in flight. Construction lasted from 1934 to 1939, and at the time it was the largest structure in the world with 5,000 office units. The destruction of World War II took its toll, and part of the Tempelhof Airport building was destroyed. When Berlin was divided into 4 sectors in 1949, the American military government took over the central airport. During the 48-49 blockade of Berlin by Soviet forces, all routes of access were closed by land and water, and planes provided the only link into the Western world outside Berlin. Planes involved in the Berlin airlift took off about every 90 seconds. American and British planes used Tempelhof, Gatow, and the new Tegel Airport to fly into West Berlin with provisions and industrial goods to keep the city alive. In 1951, civilian air traffic resumed at Tempelhof Airport. In 1975, civilian traffic was moved to the Berlin Tegel Airport. Technical facilities at Tempelhof remain fully operational. Today, Tempelhof Airport is Tempelhof Air Base, home of the United States Air Force in West Berlin.
President Reagan's plane is scheduled to land approximately 5 minutes from now. We're still awaiting transmission from Tempelhof Air Base. West Berlin is one of the most enchanting cities you will ever find, no matter how far you travel around the world. It's a city of water canals and boat trips that take hours to get from one point to the other. A city of green parks and sprawling places where people go for recreation. Rivers that offer some very, very fine beaches. It's a place that attracts tourists. It's a big convention center. The International Convention Center opened several years ago, and it attracts exhibits from hobbyists to some of the most extravagant World's Fair presentations you'll find any place in the world. And the man who heads up this city is Mayor Richard von Weizsäcker. And while everybody was burning the midnight oil, all of us connected with the Reagan visit and covering it or having any touch with it at all, while we were all getting ready last night for today, we stopped at the mayor's office and talked to Governing Mayor Richard von Weizsäcker of West Berlin about today's big event here in West Berlin. Dr. von Weizsäcker, you're hosting someone that many of us have not seen ourselves. Hopefully we'll get a chance today. But how does it feel to be playing host to the President of the United States?
Well, it's a great honor to receive the President of the American people, with whom we are bound together in basic beliefs and gratefulness that they protect our freedom. The Berliners will not forget to whom they owe their freedom in difficult times, and I think President Reagan is the best and first man to receive our feelings of gratitude and of close cooperation.
Well, after his speech to the Bundestag earlier this week and other things that have developed, do you think that President Reagan's trip will help improve and cement relations between the two countries even tighter?
You know, if you prepare a journey to see friends, usually you do very good homework. And that's what the American administration has done this time too. Some of the speeches and papers produced by the administration in Washington have been extremely helpful to overcome certain misunderstandings or differences of opinion. And the speech on Wednesday, I think, in the Bundestag in Bonn, which I have been attending to, made a deep impression. I must really say I've been a member of the Bundestag for many years. I have never witnessed a reception which was so good that one of President Reagan. And I think that makes a great impact and will certainly improve the relations, which is perhaps not so necessary in Berlin, but in some other parts of Europe.
Mayor von Weizsäcker, do you have any final words for our audience?
Well, I simply want to say that we are very grateful also that the American soldiers and their families will be able to meet their president during his visit. And I hope that in the coming years we will always stand together as we have been in the past years. And I think President Reagan will bring back home the hearty greetings of the Berliners to the American people.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. A delightful man, Dr. Richard von Weizsäcker, the mayor of West Berlin. Air Force One is landing. It's on the ground at Tempelhof Central Airport. Specialist Kyle King at Tempelhof Air Base. Kyle?
Electric with excitement. Everybody's craning their neck now to get a look at the president, because he's right behind the doorway, and they're just now connecting the ramp for the plane so he can get off. At the airbase here, we have members of all the military in this city. We have members of the Berlin Brigade, 6th Infantry, members of the British and French forces, and of course the prestigious 298th Army Band that plays for the brigade, and members of the Berlin Brigade drill team. Dignitaries are now starting to gather around the red carpet at the base of Air Force One, and we're still awaiting the president to step off the plane. The press here is just going wild now. Everybody seems to be trying to get a shot of the president. Photographers are just one on top of another. And inside the press box, looking out of Tempelhof Air Base, is Airman Jerry Cormier. I don't know if he can hear me, but I'd like to go up there and see if he can comment on what it's like up there from the press point of view. Jerry, can you hear me? Well, apparently we're having some difficulty with that connection, but as we stand here and wait now, we can get a good idea of what it's like for the presidential visit. It's been a whirlwind tour for Mr. Reagan these last 10 days. He left, of course, Washington, knowing that it was...
There he is.
Knowing that... the president's now stepping out with his wife, Nancy. The crowd is, of course, applauding, and the 298th Army Band is striking up a tune. The president is waiting now at the top of the stairs and now stepping down. The military have all come to attention, and this is the moment that everyone's been waiting for. It seems as though people have waited a long time, but now it's all in the past as everybody's waiting now for the president, who will be coming down past the troops, reviewing the troops, and will be speaking to the troops stationed here in West Berlin, the American, French, and of course the British.
Kyle?
As the president continues on the last leg of his trip, he's expected to go to several other locations. Of course, he'll be going over to the Schloss Charlottenburg, where Rick Delisle and Peter Dole will be standing by with a complete report on that. He'll be signing the Golden Book, of course, as he's welcomed to the city. Members of the military are now saluting the president, and they're awaiting his review of the troops. It'll be a few minutes before the president actually speaks, and the band is, of course, still playing for him. Monty, I don't know exactly what you can tell from the itinerary of the president, but he's now walking with the commanding generals of the city, the American commandants here in Berlin, and the president looks fit as a fiddle. He's now standing in front of the Berlin Brigade drill team, which is honor guard, dressed in their blues. The president is now walking past. Everyone's standing at rigid attention. The soldiers, of course, have prepared for this moment for weeks and perhaps even months, some of them. The president's now passing in review of the British forces and is approaching the French, who are standing at attention in their khaki uniforms with white gloves, black berets. The president is addressing now the American commander of the Berlin Brigade, General Sutter, walking past the 298th Army Band, and now passing in front of the 6th Infantry, members from the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Battalion, and 4th Battalion of that prestigious infantry division. Behind the president, flags fly from every state of the Union, and the flags, of course, from the units themselves. As the president passes by the Berlin Brigade, he'll be inspecting troops from the Air Force unit stationed here at Tempelhof Air Base, which is, of course, the home of the U.S. Air Force in Berlin. And the president now seems to have passed all the troops. He's going to be turning around, and in just a few moments, he'll be speaking to the American troops that are stationed here in the city. Now let's try to find out if we can get a hold of Airman Jerry Cormier, who's up in the press booth. Jerry, can you hear us yet? Well, apparently Jerry's still not able to hear us. And as we can see now, the president's returning. He's been greeted by all the dignitaries that have come out to express their support for his visit, which is, of course, a historic event. Still awaiting word on exactly how long he'll be speaking. Monty, it's still electric with excitement out here. I don't know exactly how long it will be before he speaks. Do you have any connection with the Charlottenburg Palace yet, where Rick will be picking up his historic signing of the Golden Book?
No, we will be going out there shortly, but right now we're going to stay at Tempelhof, Kyle. It looks like a...
Well, apparently we're not able to go back there at this time. The president now is standing in front of the crowd here, which is a large crowd. They were anticipating a couple thousand, because the community at about 5,000 is just about all here today. Members of the units not represented in the formation are here in their uniforms. They have the day off. This has been declared a holiday here in West Berlin by the commander of the city. And the families, soldiers, airmen, a couple sailors stationed here in Berlin are all getting a good look at the president now as he walks along through the crowd. His wife Nancy, of course, with him. He's going to be riding in a motorcade over to the podium where he's expected to deliver a speech to the troops that are stationed here in West Berlin. The crowd is about 3,000, it looks, and everyone is trying to get a hand extended out to the president, who's greeting as many people as he possibly can. I notice that the president is taking his time today. He seems to be enjoying the crowd, which is the only time that he'll be speaking directly to Americans, solely Americans, on his European tour. His tour, of course, has seen some demonstrations in other cities, but here in West Berlin there's been a relatively calm scene. The city itself has been anticipating his visit now for several weeks, and we're...
He works all the way down.
The president's now made his way through about half of the crowd. He's still trying to shake as many hands as he can. And it seems as though it'll be just about 5 minutes before he actually addresses the American community here in West Berlin. The Allied presence here, of course, represented by soldiers from the United States, British forces, and the French forces here in the city. Members of the 6th Infantry are still standing at attention. The Honor Guard is still waiting for the president to pass once more in review. French and British troops are standing at rigid attention. They've been preparing for this moment for months now. And the president is slowing down now. He seems to be enjoying shaking as many hands as he can. He has the American commandant and the commander of the American troops with him. They're slowly passing by.
Kyle, is there a lot of excitement in the air? I mean, people really excited about seeing the president for the first time?
Well, people are all trying to get out there and shake his hand as much as is possible. The crowd is fairly deep, and is, of course, impossible for everyone to get a chance to go out and see him, but he's doing his best to try and work his way through the crowd slowly. The ones that are out on the front edges of the crowd, of course, anybody that's under about 3'2" is right out there in front. And there are many children, of course, that have squeezed out between the legs of their parents and gotten away for just a quick glimpse of the president, which is, of course, one of the most exciting things that a small child could see, I guess. This is one of the best times that the American military community has had in a long time, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing for many of us to see the president in person. The president's now just about 100 yards from where he'll be addressing the American community here, and he's slowing down a little bit more now just to try to get as many handshakes in as he can. It seems as though the people are trying to move forward now, and the Secret Service agents, of course, are being very cooperative, letting everybody get as close to the president as possible within the realms of what's safe for him. Troops are still standing by, and the press crowd now is gathering around the podium where they expect the president to be speaking in just a few minutes. The press, of course, has been marvelous here because of the fact that it's such a difficult thing to get everything organized for 3 separate locations. And we're still trying to find out from Airman Jerry Cormier what exactly is going on inside, where they're going to be covering the president's speech, and they're going to have a direct connection. The president has now got up on the podium. He has the American commanders behind him for the city, and all the dignitaries are gathered around. The president will be speaking in just a few moments now. He's stepping up to the microphone, waving to the crowd. Everybody's very enthusiastic. The band has struck up one more tune. And now, course, the Star Spangled Banner. Salute to the President.
Mr. President, as you can see, your visit is a great occasion for the American community here in Berlin, and we all warmly welcome you to this very historic city. The soldiers of the U.S. Army's Berlin Brigade and the airmen of Tempelhof Air Base are all very highly trained and disciplined professionals, and they are fully ready to carry out all of their missions that are assigned to them. They are particularly proud to be serving their country here in Berlin and protecting the freedom of this city that means so much to us. And they and their families are particularly pleased that you are visiting and speaking with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, our Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for a most heartwarming welcome. I can't tell you how much Nancy and I appreciate it. I think I will open with just a little news note. It might not have reached you as yet. I left Washington, the Senate having passed a budget, the House not having passed it, and at 11 o'clock last night received the telephone call, the House too has passed a budget. And when the two get together in conference, I can guarantee you that while there may be some alterations here and there, basically, the budget for the military of the United States will be what is necessary to enable you to do the job you're doing. You know, over this last week, I've met with presidents and prime ministers, even the Queen, but being with you, the men and women of our armed forces, is one of the proudest moments of this entire trip. I'm proud of all of you who are serving in Europe, and I bring you not only my personal gratitude, but that of all the folks back home. We think of you often, and needless to say, you're regularly in the hearts and minds of course, your families, your friends, and your sweethearts. But you're in the hearts of a lot of Americans who don't know you by name. They just know that you are their G.I. Joes and Jills, and they love you too. And of course, I must say too, here, you, the families who are here with your men, you deserve a special word of thanks and gratitude for what you're doing here in their behalf and thus in the behalf of all of our country. You too are serving nobly. The Constitution says I'm your commander-in-chief. Well, I assure you that not a day goes by that my thoughts don't turn in one way or another to you who man the ramparts of freedom. There are now some 300,000 of you here in Europe, American men and women defending freedom far from home. I know that as one individual out of all those thousands, you may not realize how your day-to-day work fits into the big picture. Well, in the few minutes I have today, I'd like to tell you how you fit into the scheme of history, why you're here, and why each individual's contribution is so important. I know it's hard to keep your eye on history when the hours are long and you're homesick, and it's very hard to take the long view when your sergeant keeps telling you to move faster and grunt harder. But you're here because you're vital to freedom, the crowning glory of our civilization. America wouldn't be America without freedom, and we can't keep it without you. It's never more than one generation away from extinction. Every generation has to ensure that it will be there and passed on to the next. We need not look very far from this airport to see just how important your service really is. Despite the ever-present threat from the East, our role here has preserved a period of peace longer than any Europe has known in this century. And peace in Europe means peace in America. At this very moment, the forces of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact are poised only a few miles from here. They aren't there to protect the people of Eastern Europe. The Iron Curtain wasn't woven to keep people out. It's there to keep people in. The most obvious symbol of this is the Berlin Wall. And you know, if I had a chance, I'd like to ask the Soviet leaders one question. In fact, I may stuff the question in a bottle and throw it over the wall when I go there today. I really want to hear their explanation. Why is that wall there? Why are they so afraid of freedom on this side of the wall? Well, the truth is, they're scared to death of it because they know that freedom is catching and they don't dare leave their people have a taste of it. The huge number of Soviet tanks that rumble through the countryside, the Soviet missiles that peer over the border, they aren't there for defense. They're there to threaten the West and divide the alliance. Well, our forces and those of NATO have a different idea. Our forces have a different assignment. We don't seek to make Europe captive. We seek to keep Europe free. The people of West Germany, through their government, have time and again asked that we stand together in defense of freedom, both theirs and ours. And President Carsten's recent visit to the U.S. 2nd Armored Division was symbolic of our unity. Just as the Europeans support your presence here, I, too, as President, want to support you by giving you what you need to do your job. I'm determined that you will have fair pay, new equipment, top-notch training, and the best leadership. America is honored by your service. Your job may sometimes seem routine, but believe me, it isn't. It's part of a noble cause, the defense of freedom and dignity. And you in uniform, you are the peacemakers. Because you're doing what you're doing, we have a chance to preserve peace. And I promise you that is going to be the goal as long as this administration is in Washington. You know, there have been 4 wars in my lifetime. I don't want to see another. I'm going to tell you a story about one of those wars, only because it tells the difference between two societies, ours and that society on the other side of the wall. It goes back to a war when a B-17 bomber was flying back across the channel, badly shot up by anti-aircraft fire. The ball turret that hung beneath the belly of the plane had taken a hit, was jammed. They couldn't get the ball turret gunner out while they were flying, and he was wounded. And out over the channel, the plane started to lose altitude. As they started, the skipper ordered bail out, and as the men started to leave the plane, the boy in the ball turret knew he was being left to go down with the plane. The last man to leave the plane saw the captain sit down on the floor and take his hand. And he said, "Never mind, son. We'll ride it down together." Congressional Medal of Honor, posthumously awarded. That citation that I read when I was serving in that same war stuck with me for many years and came back to me just a few years ago when the Soviet Union gave its highest honor, a gold medal, to a man, a Spaniard, living in Moscow. But they don't give citations. They don't tell you why. They just give them the medal. So I did some digging to find out why he was their highest honoree. Well, he had spent 8 years in Cuba before going to Moscow. And before that, he had spent 23 years in Mexico, in prison. He was the man who buried the pickaxe in the head of Leon Trotsky. Head. They gave their highest honor for murder. We gave our highest honor to a man who would sacrifice his life to comfort a boy who had to die. I don't know of anything that explains the difference between the society we're trying to preserve and the society we're defending the world against than that particular story. God bless you all for what you're doing.
Well, we're still here live at Tempelhof Central Airport where the President has finished his speech. He's moved up into the crowd again with his wife Nancy, and he's shaking some final hands before we're expecting him to move on. We're not exactly sure yet exactly where he's going to depart from. There are several helicopters standing by at this time, and also a limousine behind the President with a core of press gathered around, burgeoning over each other, trying to get shots of him while he's trying to talk to some of the soldiers and thank everyone for being here in Berlin. Now, Monty's back at the station. Sergeant Jones, do you have any word yet on where the President will be going next?
Kyle will be going on to Checkpoint Charlie, and we have a couple of things to do before that, so we'll leave you now and pick you up later for the President's departure. Thank you very much. Specialist Kyle King at Tempelhof Air Base. Well, in trying to get reaction to the visit to West Berlin by President Reagan, we learned that the Washington correspondent for the West German television program was in the city, and we asked him to come by and share some thoughts with us during this coverage of the President's visit. Lothar Löwe is a native West Berliner, a German journalist working in the American capital in Washington, D.C. He was asked to leave East Berlin when he was near here. The communist government asked him to leave because of his reporting there. He's reported on events from around the world, from all the major capitals, and certainly can provide an insight into the visit by President Reagan that few other people can. Lothar Löwe.
I would say the vast majority of the people in West Berlin are very well aware that their freedom is preserved not by the Bundeswehr, although the Bundeswehr plays a role in NATO, but their freedom is preserved and maintained mainly by the three Western allies, and particularly by the Americans. I think this is a town, despite certain demonstrations, despite certain banners you may see in the streets, this is a city and a town in which Americans are popular. No doubt about it. Don't kid yourself. Americans are wanted here. Americans are welcome here. And Americans are popular. And so is President Reagan when he gets here. He is welcome in Berlin, as all the other presidents who came to the city were welcome.
Why do we have a small group of people, as everybody says it is, who are against the visit of President Reagan? Can you shed some light on that, perhaps?
Well, let's look at it this way. There is a new young generation who has not seen the care parcels I saw. They have not seen and not lived through the blockade. They didn't suffer by hunger and by cold as a lot of the older Berliners. It's a new generation. For them, it's history. The Marshall Plan, the blockade, the Cold War, the role the Americans played in the reconstruction of Europe. People, for them, it's history. They have a different view of America, no doubt about it. Watergate, Vietnam, certain elements of American policy in Latin America contribute to that view. I would say you have not a hostile generation, but you have a more critical generation of Germans also in Berlin who view certain aspects of American foreign policy critical. I will say this. Not all the people who demonstrate against the visit of President Reagan are necessarily anti-American. They may be anti-Reagan and they may be anti-Republican or anti-conservative, but they may not be anti-Reagan. Nevertheless, I think they are. They have the right to express their views. This is an old American tradition, and the Americans will understand it. But it's another question, the question of tact and hospitality. Right. You may disagree with President Reagan, and I do in certain aspects. I think he's personally a very likable man, a remarkable president, but I disagree with certain aspects. But if you invite the president to Berlin, and he is your guest, and he is the guest in Berlin, our guest in Berlin, then you do not hurt your guest and the feelings of your guest by demonstrating and have ugly demonstrations and insulting slogans against the person who is invited in this town. This is just bad behavior. I do not criticize people who criticize Reagan. I think they have the chance to express their views before the visit, after the visit, any time. But the moment the President of the United States gets here, he deserves all the hospitality and at least the politeness, despite certain disagreements, because he is the President of the United States, he's the head of state, he is the head of state of a friendly nation. The United States, the Americans, I regard the Americans as our best friends, good friends, and you have to behave appropriately. That I think is the gist of it.
One more thing, something not quite as serious perhaps. You're a native Berliner, you're a journalist who's worked all over the world covering the news, and you normally work out of Washington as a correspondent for the first German television network, and now you're back home with our president arriving here. What kind of feeling do you get with this?
Well, it's very interesting to see how this visit works. I mean, I remember this remarkable visit of President Kennedy in 1963. It was a tremendous. I was a great Kennedy fan, and I still am. I mean, the sentence "Ich bin ein Berliner" and his motorcade was terrific. Lyndon Johnson's visit was terrific. Carter's visit was different. Nixon's visit was different. This time, President is coming. There's no motorcade. He is helicoptering. It's a different visit. I am a little bit sad about the fact that the president may not have the chance to meet the real Berliners. And I may add something to my German friends. How would the Germans feel if Helmut Schmidt, our chancellor, comes to Washington and he will find 20,000 demonstrators in Lafayette Park across the White House attacking him in banners as a warmonger, as an idiot, as an Holocaust believer, whatever, insulting remarks. I think the Germans would react all the Germans would react very sensitive to that, and I think a lot of our German friends who think they have to demonstrate when the president comes should think about that aspect.
Lothar Lübe, correspondent for the first West German television network, who normally works out of Washington, D.C. We'll continue with coverage of President Reagan's visit after a check of the latest news.
President Reagan flew from Bonn to West Berlin this morning. Mr. Reagan's 3.5-hour stopover in West Berlin sets aside time for a view of the concrete wall. A court ban on demonstrations has been imposed during President Reagan's visit to West Berlin, but a leftist group nonetheless is urging protesters to rally against Reagan's nuclear policies. Following the stop in West Berlin, the president will make a brief return to Bonn before ending his 10-day tour of Europe. An Israeli major general has become the highest-ranking Israeli officer ever to die in battle. The Israeli military command says Major General Yukatil Adam was killed yesterday in southern Lebanon while on his way to Israel's military headquarters in that region. The military command says Adam was apparently ambushed by Palestinian guerrillas. He was a deputy chief of staff in the Israeli armed forces. Concern is mounting on Capitol Hill over the widening scope of the crisis in Lebanon. Senator Mark Hatfield has appealed to President Reagan to suspend all military aid to Israel and other Middle East nations. In the House, a draft resolution has been introduced calling on Mr. Reagan to determine whether U.S. law has been violated by Israel's use of American arms in Lebanon. Argentina says British and Argentine warplanes staged airstrikes against each other's positions on the Falkland Islands yesterday. The Argentine military command also said its patrols killed 4 British soldiers in 2 ground skirmishes and captured 1. Britain says its tragic losses in an Argentine air attack Tuesday have made peace negotiations with the Argentine military junta unthinkable. The House finally passed a 1983 budget proposal after months of trying. In a major defeat for the Democratic leadership, Republicans and conservative Democrats resurrected their coalition of last year and passed a GOP plan backed by President Reagan. The vote was 220 to 207, with 46 Democrats on the winning side. The proposed budget will produce a deficit of at least $99 billion. After the vote, President Reagan called from Bonn, West Germany, to congratulate the House Republican leaders. At least 9 tornadoes hit southeastern parts of the country of the United States yesterday, tearing the roof off of a school and blowing over house trailers. At least 19 people were injured in the tornadoes in South Carolina and Georgia, and 1 North Carolina sailor caught in a windstorm was reported missing. Up to 3 feet of water swamped parts of Missouri, where 2 days of rain earlier left 4 people dead. For AFN News, I'm Army Private Cambria Robinson.
You're listening to live coverage from AFN Berlin, the American Forces Network affiliate in the divided city. Live coverage of the visit to this city by President Ronald Reagan. We seem to hear a lot of talk about demonstrations and this growing feeling of anti-Americanism in West Berlin and across West Germany. A lot of people, Germans and Americans, say those of us in the media report on it too much, making it much bigger than it really is. There appears to be a number of young people, and people not so young too, in West Berlin at least, who are very pro-American. We had a surprise earlier this week when a group of youngsters showed up at the American Forces Shopping Center in the American sector of West Berlin. They handed out white and red roses as a show of appreciation for the presence of the United States in the divided city. AFN specialist Peter Dole rushed over there and talked with the students about their activity that afternoon.
We want to thank the American soldiers for their being here in Berlin. They saved the peace here in Berlin, and the white roses are a sign of peace. We are glad that Ronald Reagan, the American president, are coming to Berlin, and we want to show that.
Are you doing this by yourself then?
No, we are from the Berliner Schülerunion. This is an organization for young people.
Conservative Party of Germany.
Do you like President Reagan?
Yes, I like him very much. He is a very strong president, and I think he can save the peace.
How do you feel about the other people that say that Ronald Reagan just wants to start wars?
They're stupid, very stupid. They don't see the reality.
Do you like President Reagan's policies then?
Yes, yes I do.
That was a bit of a surprise for us. We received a telephone call, actually, and we're told that some students in West Berlin were handing out roses. We went there, and certainly enough, they were, and it was a pleasing feeling for all of us. President Ronald Reagan is on his way from Tempelhof Air Base here in West Berlin to Checkpoint Charlie. Checkpoint Charlie, where the president is going, is an interesting place that draws most tourists who come to the divided city of West Berlin. Airman Jerry Cormier provides this sketch of Checkpoint Charlie.
On August 17, 1962, 18-year-old Peter Fechter, a worker in East Berlin, was shot and killed by East German border guards as he tried to flee to freedom in the West. He died between the barbed wire and the wall on East Berlin territory. This Checkpoint Charlie is the only one that can be used to travel into East Berlin by members of the Western Allied military, diplomats, and non-Germans going by car into the Soviet sector of the city. The wall surrounding West Berlin was erected in 1961, and Checkpoint Charlie is a passageway heavily guarded by Allied forces on this side and by East Germans and Soviet guards on the other side.
Working at that crossing point into East Berlin known as Checkpoint Charlie is an experience most of our soldiers who assigned duty there will never forget.
Making sure that international incidents don't occur between the East and West can be an awesome responsibility. And at the time when border security appears to be at its peak, this type of responsibility makes for an even more stressful but also interesting job. Sergeant William Butler, an MP now working at Checkpoint Charlie, gives us an idea of what it's like.
Here at the checkpoint, a lot of people don't understand how important this job is. A lot of people see us as an information service, a travel directory, something that they can go to simply to get information, find out where the good places are to shop in the East. It is more to that. We actually are the ones who make certain that when someone goes over to East Berlin, they do what they're supposed to do. They don't do the things that are going to cause problems. We keep people out of the East that have no business in there if they fall under our control. And unless we were here, the problems that would go on over there, you can imagine what they would be.
What is your official job?
My official title is NCOIC of the Charlie Checkpoint. That entails the processing of U.S. military, U.S. government, and U.S. State Department personnel who wish to visit East Berlin, either for shopping or sightseeing. What? In addition to that, I'm responsible for the supervision of the vehicle car searchers who work in conjunction with me. They simply assist me in whatever it is I do. Basically, it's not a bad job. The shifts do get a little long after a while, 12-hour shifts, and we are, as a checkpoint, open 24 hours a day. However, travel ceases after 2 in the morning. All travelers who are over there are required to be back after that time period.
When are you scheduled to work?
Our shifts run from 7 to 7. 7 in the morning to 7 in the evening. Then another NCOIC will come in and simply will change over. If there have been any incidents, any problems, we relay that information to them, and if it is still going on at the time, action will be taken afterwards.
Why do you feel you chose this particular job?
This is basically a branch of military police duty. Anywhere you go, military police duty varies. I chose the military police field simply because I am interested in law enforcement. It's something that I want to do. At the end of the day, I can feel like I did more than just go to work. I did something. If I happen to help somebody, it's even that much better.
Many people have come to the checkpoints since their creation some 21 years ago, and it's interesting to guess their overall feeling towards American checkpoint MPs. In any case, few jobs with the U.S. military ever demand such constant interaction with the party on the other side. Sergeant William Butler recognizes this responsibility, works well under various conditions, and enjoys it. I'm Army Specialist Peter Dallet reporting for AFN News.
And the President is on his way from Tempelhof Air Base to Checkpoint Charlie, and we are awaiting his arrival there. Another of our guests you're sure to enjoy, and we'll find some of his remarks interesting, is Bob Lochner. He's director of the American Chamber of Commerce in West Berlin and has served as interpreter to many dignitaries, including the late Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson. Bob has some surprising things to say about the American business presence in Berlin.
Perhaps so very visible because you don't run into American businessmen in Berlin. There are hardly any, but some 6 to 8% of Berlin industry is U.S. owned. That is to say, there are not only many big American plants here in Berlin, like Ford, IBM, Gillette, Fluor Otis, but many a big Berlin company is U.S. owned. That means that very few people, even among the German businessmen, realize that certain companies, say our Gesellschaft, are actually U.S. owned. Many of them are German companies that have been in existence for decades, some preceding the First World War, but they just happen to be U.S. owned.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of those American type companies that are here? Ford just opened their plant.
Ford is the only recent major new investment, but IBM, for instance, has greatly expanded its production, so has Gillette. Overall, over the decades, there have been many American efforts by the U.S. government and also, for instance, by General Clay after he retired, to get additional American companies to come to Berlin. But frankly, the overall success has not been very great. Ford is very much the recent big accomplishment. Before that, there was a company called MTS from Minnesota, which came in. But there are not many new American companies to Berlin, but almost equally important companies, as I said, like IBM, have expanded and have considerably invested in Berlin.
Well, as we prepare for Mr. Reagan to go to Charlottenburg Palace and meet the 20,000 or so guests there, we might think back to some of the other people who have visited Berlin. You were President Kennedy's interpreter when he was here, and you have helped some other Americans who came to visit the city and perhaps have some interesting stories to tell us.
Well, as far as President Kennedy is concerned, everybody, of course, remembers his famous statement, "I am a Berliner," in German, and most people assume that a statement of that magnitude was surely carefully thought out beforehand, but having been his interpreter, I happen to be in a position to say that it was not. It was not premeditated at all. After our triumphant ride around the city, as we walked up the stairs to Willy Brandt's office in the City Hall, the President called me to his side and said, "When we're up there, I want you to write out on a piece of paper for me, 'I am a Berliner,' in German." And then while the hundreds of thousands outside were screaming for him, he calmly sat down and wrote that into the manuscript. In other words, it was not originally in the manuscript. It was, I can only conclude, a spontaneous reaction to the fantastic reception by the Berlin people. If you want a little incident on the lighter side, what comes to mind is when Vice President Johnson came to Berlin 6 days after the wall. You will recall that President Kennedy sent him and General Clay to help boost the morale of the West Berliners, who naturally had been deeply depressed by the wall. And everything went okay during the days. It was very strenuous, and as we took him back to the plane at Tegel Airport very early in the morning, a Berlin police band struck up the tune, "Das ist die Berliner Luft," that's the Berlin air, which every Berliner knows, of course, and I don't know what got into me. I felt called upon to say to the Vice President, jokingly, of course, "You know, this is kind of like the Berlin national anthem." Well, that was a dreadful mistake, because the politician Johnson, hearing the word national anthem, stopped dead in his tracks, took off his hat, put his hand on his heart, and stood at attention. Willy Brandt, the mayor, and others walked along for a few paces, utterly baffled when they saw Johnson stop us, but then in deference to the Vice President, they all stopped and stood at attention too, so that's probably the only time that the Berlin Air, the Berliner Luft, has ever been listened to at rigid attention, and I must say I felt like sinking into the floor because it was just one of these conversational remarks, but I decided then that as an interpreter you better not volunteer anything but just stick to translating.
Bob, how do you feel about President Reagan's visit?
Well, I'm of course concerned, as are many people, that the handful really of
And President Reagan, Bob, President Reagan has arrived at the place that we had talked about before. That's Checkpoint Charlie, talking with one of the soldiers working there, Specialist Forward David Chilson, who comes from Webster, New York, is one of the folks the President is meeting. He has been here in Berlin since May of this year, is with his wife, Lou Ann, in the city, and volunteered for duty in Berlin, says he enjoys it and plans to return to law enforcement in New York State at a later date. So President Ronald Reagan is at Checkpoint Charlie. This is the place where most people come. When they come to West Berlin, they go there to see it. At the checkpoint, there's a museum that attracts a lot of attention. The museum is loaded with automobiles and various modes of transportation and devices that people have used to escape from the east into West Berlin. The President will not take time to go through that museum, obviously because of his very, very busy schedule. But Checkpoint Charlie, as we talked earlier about, is the only checkpoint that American forces personnel use in going into East Berlin. And that checkpoint that allows Allied forces to travel into East Berlin is part of the four-power agreement that provides free access in both the Soviet sector and the Allied sector of West Berlin. President Ronald Reagan, with West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, whom he had several meetings with during his stay in Bonn, and also with the mayor of West Berlin, Dr. Richard von Weizsäcker. You heard from Dr. von Weizsäcker earlier when he was commenting and providing his impressions of the President's visit to both Bonn and also here in West Berlin. His tour of Checkpoint Charlie, a rather short one, and actually there is not a lot to see there unless you do go to the museum. The President preparing now to go to Charlottenburg Palace from Checkpoint Charlie. His visit to West Berlin reminds me a lot of taking a vacation and going to some place like Athens or Rome or Paris and trying to see so many things at one time. And the President is rushing through this special visit to West Berlin, although he has been here before. But he prepares to leave Checkpoint Charlie now to go on over to Charlottenburg Palace, where he will be treated to a gigantic Volksfest, a festival of the people that involves a lot of celebrating, a lot of wonderful food, a lot of good company with old friends. And Mayor Richard von Weizsäcker referred to the relationship between President Reagan and the West Germans and the West Berliners as being a relationship of old friends. So the President's car is leaving Checkpoint Charlie, drawing waves from those lining the streets to see him at that point on his trip to West Berlin. He takes off now and goes on to Charlottenburg Castle. And at Charlottenburg Palace, Schloss or Castle, it goes by many names here. It's a Baroque building that is overwhelming when you go there. It's open to the public, and that's where the President will go for the highlight of this reception so far as the German people in West Berlin go. Of course, two separate receptions, really, the one at Tempelhof Air Base and then the one coming up at Charlottenburg Palace. Air Force Sergeant Rick Delisle is at the Palace, along with Specialist Peter Dole, and they'll be reporting from there. But let's take care of some other business at hand. Earlier this week, AFN Berlin News took to the streets to find out how some of the German people in this city feel about President Reagan coming to West Germany and West Berlin.
In light of President Reagan's West Berlin visit, we spoke with many local Germans to get an idea how the president is being received. In general, there were mixed reactions towards the president's arrival here, with an equal amount of respondents both agreeing and disagreeing with his visit.
Oh, I think it's not bad that Mr. Reagan is coming to Berlin.
I think it's good that he come to Berlin and to the Federal Republic of Germany.
I personally don't like very much the politics of President Reagan, but their allies are important for Berlin, and so I accept that he comes to Berlin.
I don't like it because I think it's not necessary that he visit us.
I'm glad he's coming. I'd like to see him. You know, I think it may be sort of a scene at times, but I'm glad he's coming.
Oh, I have nothing against America, but President Reagan, I think he is too conservative.
Well, to be honest, I feel bad because I don't like his politics at all. That's to answer your second question. And it's not that it's a question of being anti-America or something like that. I like the Americans and I like America, but I don't like Reagan, so I don't like his politics. So that's why I feel bad about him coming to Berlin.
I feel good. I am sure this is good that President Reagan comes to Berlin.
Defense and foreign policy were the touchier subjects pronounced by those interviewed, and here again the comments were mixed.
Yes, I feel that his policy is very dangerous, and I must say that I don't like him because I think it's no good politic.
Do you like the president's politics now?
No. The last time it has been a little better, the last speech at the television, but generally I don't like him at all. Would be Ted Kennedy or someone would be more welcome.
I'm a born Berliner, and I remembered because my parents told me that Kennedy was here as he was president in Berlin in 1961, and I myself believe that would be pretty good if the American president would come here to Berlin and to Bern.
He's a man who says what he thinks, and that is good, because we have a lot of political people in Germany who don't say what they mean.
Well, what he says now about START and so on, it sounds well, but I really doubt if there will be some results of that politics.
Do you like President Reagan?
Yes, I like him very much. He is a very strong president, and I think he can save the peace.
The reactions, though varied, still do not represent the entire local reaction towards President Reagan's visit, yet they do represent the general feeling of the masses. I'm Specialist Peter Dallé reporting for AFN News.
And the president is on his way to other points of the city, finally arriving at Charlottenburg Castle very soon now to be treated to that Volksfest, or Fest of the People, that we talked about. Air Force Sergeant Rick Delisle and Specialist Peter Dallé out there awaiting the president's arrival. This is the ceremony that was an invitation-only thing, and the German citizens of West Berlin will be on hand to greet the American president. There are approximately 20,000 people, we are told, who have been invited to the festival at the Baroque Palace, where dignitaries go for meetings from time to time as they come here. Charlottenburg Palace, here in West Berlin, is a fitting place for President Reagan to visit with our German friends. The beauty of this Baroque Palace is overwhelming when you go into it, and today's festival in Mr. Reagan's honor will not be forgotten soon.
Charlottenburg Palace has been a favorite of monarchs since its construction was completed in 1699. It was severely damaged in the war in 1943, But if some of those monarchs would see it today, they'd hardly know that this Baroque palace had received a scratch. Restoration began in 1950 and has recreated the original forms and colors. Today, Charlottenburg Palace is open to the public, concerts are given in the Oak Gallery, and there's a museum of arts and crafts in one other part of the palace. It's here that President Ronald Reagan will sign the city's Golden Book. And it's here that Mr. Reagan will address the populace of West Berlin. Mr. Reagan will be treated to a Berlin festival, the likes of which few have a chance to see. I'm Specialist Peter Dalle reporting for AFN News.
President Ronald Reagan's visit to West Berlin is a monumental thing for most of the people here. It is designed to reaffirm the strong feelings and warm friendship that exists between the West Germans, West Berliners, and the people of the United States. Charlottenburg Palace, the place where we will be going next as the president arrives there, is a fitting place for him to attend, and there are numerous entertainment events scheduled. And it seems like an overwhelming party, although the president may not be there to enjoy all of it. There just seems to be too much to happen during the short time he will be there. West Berlin is somewhat of a unique city in that it is a city that attracts tourism. It's one of the most popular industries we have here. But as Bob Lochner from the Chamber of Commerce told us the presence of American business is not quite as obvious. There are a lot of American-owned businesses here, but they have German names and sometimes are hidden. But tourism is something that is a big business in West Berlin. And for some time, there's been a great deal of concern over Berlin being a dying city. A lot of Germans, West Germans and Berliners alike, were concerned that Berlin was turning into a city of the aged, all of the young people moving to West Germany and other places for better opportunity and away from the Berlin Wall. Well, apparently that is changing. The attitude of the young people seems to be changing for the better so far as West Berlin goes. A survey recently conducted shows that young people find Berlin a very attractive city. Some of the problems that exist in other parts of West Germany perhaps are not here. Pollution doesn't seem to be as big a problem here. The lakes and streams and rivers are relatively clean. Clean beaches for sunbathing, areas for swimming, surfboarding, motorboating, sailboating, boats that take you up and down the rivers, a tremendous number of things for tourists to do here. And several hundred students were recently in West Berlin, and one of the newspapers conducted a survey among those several hundred youngsters and found they liked Berlin, and many of them wanted to come back here. As well as I can recall, the figure was about half, 47% or so, decided that they would like to come back to Berlin to live and work. And President Reagan's visit here probably can help foster some reassurance and some more positive feelings about the city of West Berlin. And we will see how he reacts and how the West Berliners react to him when he arrives at Charlottenburg Palace. We had some reaction from the German community on the president's visit and his politics and all of that. The American community has some predictable but interesting response to this presidential visit.
The American and the German media has mostly been covering the Germans' point of view in the presidential visit. Now it's time to ask the Americans in West Berlin, whom the president has also come to see, how they feel about the presidential visit.
I'm very proud that the president's coming to Berlin. It's always nice to know that the president's going to remember us here.
I just hope it doesn't stir up too much undue trouble. He's made some good comments, but I just hope he doesn't push it too far.
I think it's great. I'm glad he's coming. I hope I get to see him when he comes.
Do you think that the demonstrations and the protests are going to have any effect on it?
Well, maybe on security, yes, but I think they could handle it pretty well on the thing. And I don't think that the president should mind it all. He's used to it.
What do you think about President Reagan coming?
I think the visit will do the people here some good, you know, not only as far as the American people, but the German people, you know, just as well. It shows word of good faith, and as far as the American here, it shows that he's, you know, pulling some initiative to make the world a better place to live.
Do you think it's going to help German-American relations?
I hope so. I definitely hope so. And in most cases, I think it will.
I think it's good for our allies to see that we are resolved to stay in Europe. I'm worried about his safety, but other than that, I think it's great.
I think it's nice that he's coming to Berlin. I think a lot of people ought to be excited about it, and I think it's wonderful that he's coming. I know a lot of people are upset about it, just because there's a lot of anti-demonstrations and everything. And I think it's a shame that we can't come together more as allies, you know, and have a much more peaceful type of demonstration for him.
Well, I'm excited about it. I'm going to go out and see him tomorrow, and I think it's a good opportunity for the Americans to get out and express how they feel about the president coming.
Do you think the demonstrations and protests are going to hurt it any?
Well, I hope not. Tomorrow's demonstration is supposed to be a peaceful demonstration about the anti-nuclear and the arms freeze. I hope that they don't spoil it with any violence. If it's a non-violent demonstration, I don't think it'll do anything to spoil his visit.
What do you think about the visit?
I think it's a good idea. If nothing else, to make the American presence known and to support the morale of the troops. I think it's a good idea. And I hope the demonstrations here don't get too out of hand. I see they've beefed up security quite a bit.
Hey, do you think it's going to help German-American relations?
Well, I don't know. I'm not too sure about that. It might polarize German-American relations. If you take a look at some of the signs that have been posted here, it seems like the ones that are against Reagan will really come out, and I think a lot of support will come out. So I don't think it'll necessarily help. I think it may tend to polarize it, unfortunately.
Okay. It's the chance of a lifetime for many to say they were host to the President of the United States inside the walls of West Berlin. For AFN News, I'm Army Private Cambria Robinson.
The President has returned to Tempelhof Central Airport, apparently to board air transportation to take him to Charlottenburg Palace. So that is not that far away time-wise, probably 3-4 minutes before he arrives at Charlottenburg. You know, one of the amazing things with West Berliners, not so much, but West Germans and others who come here, is we think about West Berlin being a city when in reality it isn't, according to its constitution, which is at present valid only in West Berlin. Berlin is a German land or a federal state. So when we talk about West Berlin being a land or a state, it brings some interesting things to mind so far as government goes. And when you talk about the West Berlin Senate or the West Berlin Parliament, people stop and look at you rather strangely, because a lot of people think of West Berlin as being a city, but although it is viewed as a West German state. In some of that reaction that we just had from the American reaction from people on the President's visit, they were concerned about demonstrations and that sort of thing. There was a demonstration in West Berlin last night. It started about 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon and continued into the evening. It was organized by approximately 180 different organizations. They claim they had 100,000 demonstrators involved, but West Berlin police told us today that figure was closer to 40,000. But the organizers of that demonstration were very careful to point out it was not an anti-Reagan protest. It was not an anti-American demonstration. It was an anti-nuclear demonstration. They chose the evening before the President's arrival here to use that as a way of promoting their cause, their anti-nuclear demonstration. NATO ministers meeting in Bonn when the President was there reaffirmed the democratic aims of the alliance between the countries and declaring the main purpose is for avoiding war. The ministers signed a declaration in which they vowed to seek disarmament across the board while at the same time boosting military preparedness. The ministers vowing that no NATO weapon will ever be used except in response to attack, and they said that sovereignty, equality, independence, and territorial integrity of all states must exist. But in contrast, it says the Soviet Union has devoted a large part of its resources to a massive military buildup, far exceeding its defense needs and supporting the projection of the military power on a global scale. The ministers meeting as police clashed with hundreds of demonstrators who marched on the West German Parliament and burned U.S. flags. One man set himself ablaze and tried to cut his own throat. He was rushed to a hospital. West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt later told the summit that the demonstrators outside were an important part of democracy. In his words, a state in which no demonstrations take place is suspect of not allowing full rights of freedom to its citizens. More than 250,000 demonstrators reportedly taking part in that anti-nuclear demonstration in Bonn, and then last night, of course, here in West Berlin. The president is on his way to Charlottenburg Palace, that wonderful Baroque palace that has served as a focal point for people from time to time coming here visiting dignitaries. Surely many other American presidents have gone there, as well as leaders of many, many countries. The palace was heavily destroyed in World War II, but has been restored, and if you could see it today, you would probably not guess that any damage had ever been done to it. And that's the case with a lot of the museums and the cultural type edifices that you find in West Berlin. Many of them have been restored to near mint condition. Charlottenburg Palace, the Baroque castle that it is, underwent a tremendous security tightening days before the president arrived there. Police dogs and security men were used to go over the entire outside grounds area. They went over it meter by meter. They searched every tree. The place was locked up about 3 days before Mr. Reagan arrived. And also, they even searched the waters, a lake that is on the palace grounds. They even searched the bottom of that for security reasons. So security has been very tight all along with this visit of President Reagan to West Berlin, and probably no one has any trouble understanding why. Charlottenburg Palace, I wonder if we could probably, hopefully, scare up Rick Delisle, Air Force Sergeant Rick Delisle of Peter Dolay up there. Rick?
For his address to one of the best examples of Prussian architecture that's still standing in the western sector. Building began here late in the 17th century as a country house for the wife of Frederick III, and it took 100 years for the palace to be expanded to the size that it is right now. The district of Charlottenburg is of historical significance in Berlin. Actually, it was here that the town hall was moved from East Berlin in 1948 after communist riots caused the cessation of activities in the traditional town hall in what is now the Russian sector. The city government, of course, was eventually moved to the district of Schöneberg, and that, of course, is where President Kennedy made his famous speech in our city. The atmosphere out here today is very much that of a festival. There are bands playing, tents set up on the grounds. We expect close to 30,000 people here today. Right now, Peter Dolay is in the middle of that crowd, and I'm wondering if he could share some of what's happening around there with him.
People are still coming into the fairgrounds at this point. I could probably estimate it at some 25 or 30,000 people.
We have had a mix-up on video.
Combo, that's led by Sergeant Alfonso Porter. There's about 5 people in that band. Well, Horst Jankowski, his band is also here, and off to the sides there's some, well, it seems there's, well, out there actually in the pond right now, there's a boat with some frogmen and people checking out the bottom of the pond here. The president's helicopter appears to be coming in the distance, but I'm not really sure if it's his. There's 2 on the horizon at this point as people are crowding by me to get towards the front. Peter? And off to the side here, a female with an American flag cape. I'm not really sure where she got that, but there are a lot of other people who are walking by with American flags, waving in their hand with a picture of Ronald Reagan on the back of it. There's a lot of food here as I see people walking by with hot dogs and drinks at this point. They're serving beer off to the sidelines and a great deal of what seems like cabaret excitement going on here on the behind the bushes behind me. There's a bit of anticipation. Some people in the back here, most eyes are on the front. They're staring towards the podium, whereas in the back. That's it from the fairgrounds here.
Peter, we were having a bit of a mix-up on video, and what we were seeing was not what was going on where you were, for our television viewers at least. And we'll be getting back as soon as the President's plane arrives. I was interested to find out if there was any sight of a 300-pound cake. A baker who works for a restaurant on the Kurfürstendamm here decided to bake a 300-pound cake, and that's supposed to be on display out at Charlottenburg Castle this afternoon as President Reagan joins that Volksfest.
Here on Good Morning Berlin.
A lot of evidence of festivity. Hanging painters over the wall at Potsdam. Right. And as we drove up to the Charlottenburg Palace this morning, we saw at the West End elevated train station, which is referred to as the S-Bahn here in Berlin, some graffiti and bad words for the president, and people standing on the roof at that time trying to decide now whether to cover it up or leave it as if the shoe were on the other foot for this visit. But people here are very much excited about what's going to be happening in just a few minutes. We've had a lot of helicopter flights, overflights, in the past few minutes, and we're not exactly sure if any of them have been the president. Security, of course, as you realize, is very tight, but it looks like Marine One is now in the area of the Charlottenburg Palace.
Rick, are you able to see the pictures that the television is showing now?
Yes, I am.
For television viewers, and it won't be of any interest to radio listeners so far as the pictures go, except the pictures they were showing soccer and the soapbox derby and some various other things. There's a tremendous effort here in West Berlin, Rick, I think you'll agree, between the Americans and the Germans to create situations that allow a wonderful interplay between the Germans and the Americans to help us to understand each other's ways of doing things, to interact.
I have found out here with the various people that we've talked to, both the German press corps and the security people who are here, very much an attitude similar to Herr Löwes, who you talked to earlier, where he said where possibly all of us do not agree with what Mr. Reagan says, but he is a guest in our city, and we are doing our best to make him welcome. I spoke earlier with one of the German Secret Service guards who will be guarding President Reagan, and those were his sentiments exactly. I don't agree with all his policies, but I am very honored to be able to have the opportunity to serve him in this way while he's a guest in our city.
Right now, we were talking to Bob Lochner earlier, and we television viewers are seeing some response to that American business presence we were talking about. And that has been a sore point with many people, the Kurfürstendamm, which is a wonderful boulevard that goes down through the city. It was originally, many, many years ago, a footpath connecting a couple of interesting spots from the monarchs and the royalty, and turned into something much like the Ginza in Japan, if you can remember that from Tokyo, the shopping place, and the fast food restaurants, the hamburger places, and all of the other things that exist there. A lot of folks take exception to that because they are saying that that is taking away or detracting from the wonderful old-time flavor that was Berlin.
Well, you know, it's kind of a quandary. Of course, as many of us remember, in the 50s and 60s, the American way of life was a way of life that was modeled all over the world.
Right.
And you build fast food restaurants and arcades on the Kudamm because that's what everybody wants. Now, at this time, in fact, they're still very well patronized. But at this time, people are looking toward more preserving a culture, I guess, in our city. And the fact is the things are already built there, and there's something that they're living with and trying to correct as time goes on.
The chopper has landed, it appears, Rick.
It is in the area. We're on the other side of the palace itself, but we expect that President Reagan will be on the podium quite soon. With him on the podium, we should see the mayor of Berlin, Mayor von Weizsäcker, also Hans-Dietrich Genscher, and Alexander Haig, and of course Chancellor Schmidt. There's excitement starting to keep in the crowd here. In fact, Peter Dope is up there right now. Peter, perhaps you could describe to us what's going on. Do they realize out there the president has arrived?
The people appear to be pretty excited about the president. He's just landed behind the Charlottenburg Palace at this time. Most are trying to get the best view that they can of the president over the top of the podium. He's behind the building. From this point, you really can't see him, but he should be coming about, I would hope, in the next 5 minutes. There's a lot of electricity in the air as you sort of feel it. The president had circled the fairgrounds itself when he came overhead here, and sort of sent shivers up the spine of many people that were at least standing by me. The bands have stopped playing here temporarily, but I believe they're going to pick up in just a little bit. Once again, there are two bands that are up from Kaiserslautern, the 76th Army Band, as well as their combo. I, for instance, or not for instance, I, for example, am standing next to the fountain here that they just turned on about 10 minutes ago.
They're saying that the president is arriving and his car is pulling into the Charlottenburg Palace area now.
They're addressing the people now. But I'm not really sure if...
It's hard sometimes to keep up with this. Peter, there were 4 helicopters, as I understand it, involved in this maneuver back and forth, and it's sometimes difficult to figure which one was the president's and which one was security and the press. There were, I believe the figure was 250 members of the press traveling with the president on his European trip, and that, I hope I'm right in saying that probably is a record number. Certainly is a large number.
Monty, it's one of the most amazing things to me as I came out here this morning and watched the crowd queuing up is the fact that you've got the feeling in Berlin over the past few weeks that positively every person under the age of, say, 25 was completely against President Reagan's visit. And yet, as you look out among the crowd, you see a very large representative number of young people in Berlin who seem to be here to support his trip. And so what you were referring to earlier about the media sometimes giving a false impression may have, in fact, been true this time around. It's a very scattered crowd in terms of age and sex, as a matter of fact.
The president appears to be walking inside and will be signing the city's golden guest book. Normally, dignitaries who come here go to the city hall at Schöneberg, the Schöneberg district of the city, and they sign the city's golden guest book there. For the president's visit, because of time and security, whatever, they have brought the golden book to Charlottenburg Palace. And an interesting thing about this is President Reagan's signature is the first one in this book. First signature, first page. And there was a story in the press a couple of weeks ago about the last book, the one before this one. It had a couple of pages left in it, but they thought about it for a bit, I guess, at City Hall and decided, let's make this something special. Let's go on to the new book, leave the blank pages in the back of the old one, go on to the new book, and the president's signature appearing first there.
Area of the podium here at the Charlottenburg Palace. We expect the president and the entire entourage to be out here very soon. Security, as everyone figured, is very tight here. We have guards on the roof of the palace with videotape cameras, and they are very much in presence all near the ground. This morning as we drove in, there were simply dozens of police vehicles, and security is very tight, but there has been absolutely no rumble of anything here. Everyone is as we said earlier, in a very much of a festival mood, a very joyous mood out here, and the weather and the setting is exactly right for it as well.
We were told by the mayor last night when we were at his office interviewing him and talking with him, we asked about his speech because there was a bit of confusion there about who was going to speak in German or English and who was going to do what. And I asked the mayor if he was going to speak English or German. He said Mr. Reagan will speak English and he will speak German. And apparently they're going to do it in bits and pieces so that we don't have one long speech in one language or the other. And if the mayor does speak in German, we will provide a translation in English for you.
The crowd here just in front of the podium is pretty well representative also of the various walks of life and things that come together to make up Berlin and the unique city that it is. There are clergymen, military men from all of the Allied forces, and of course German political figures and local dignitaries from the city as well. Most of them, just like everyone else here, craning their necks and standing up trying to get a glimpse, the first glimpse of President Reagan as he comes through the rear doors of the Charlottenburg Palace here. There is a lot of activity right near the podium right now with cameras and security people, and we expect to be seeing him come through the door at any time now.
I wonder how the president feels. I wonder how many hands he's shaken so far in Berlin today.
Even the phrase pressing the flesh could not cover as much as he has done. It's very much a gesture of good faith, it seems, shaking everyone's hand and moving around and giving a little more substance to his visit than perhaps the security people would like when you think about it.
This visit by the president is probably going to do wonders for everybody's morale and good feelings. The mayor, in the interview that we had on earlier, and when I talked to him last night, he said he has not seen such a reception for a foreign dignitary in the West German parliament ever since he's been there. And he said the president did a lot of wonderful things. He said the right things to make the German people feel at ease and feel good and feel secure. And Mr. Reagan certainly knows how to deal with people and how to communicate with them.
Just now, Monty, Secretary of State Haig has come through the palace doors accompanied by the various Allied military leaders, and many more people now climbing to the podium and getting in place for the president's address to the Berliners, who are very much aware now, even the ones way in the back of the crowd, as to what's going on and that the fact the president has arrived here.
What about the weather? I am in the studio. I can't see a thing. Do we still have sunshine? And I can't tell from the television pictures either that I'm watching.
It's cooled down considerably, and we have now an overcast right here in the Schloss area. Of course, as you had mentioned earlier, there will be, and in fact is going on right now, a rather large Volksfest or festival right here on the grounds. Multicolored tents that we can see in the background, and the band music adds a very medieval flavor to the atmosphere as well. I'm wondering, Monty, how much is running through President Reagan's mind concerning the visits of previous presidents here to Berlin, and how all of those, President Carter, President Kennedy, and Johnson as well, all of those are pretty hard acts to follow, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but he seems to be doing it well. I have a very, very strong, warm feeling about Mr. Reagan's visit. I have been watching and listening, and I personally feel very good about it, and I think most of us do. And I think he has followed the acts before him very successfully with this visit.
I think another thing that strikes me very much in the atmosphere here at the Charlottenburg Palace anyway is that, as several people mentioned earlier during the interviews about what they felt about President Reagan's visit, that people have been a bit apprehensive about whether or not there would be any trouble, and there is absolutely none of that feeling here. It's a very, very warm, relaxed. In fact, it's the most welcome I've felt in Berlin in some months, as a matter of fact.
Well, you know, the demonstration yesterday that we talked about earlier, 40,000 or 100,000, depending on what source you use to ascertain the figure. Even that was peaceful. West Berlin police told us this morning that the demonstration, although it was relatively large by comparison with others, very, very peaceful. It was an anti-nuclear demonstration, and those people protesting made their point, but did it in a peaceful manner. There was virtually no damage, very, very little damage done, vandalism.
I can see now that several of the major television networks have their cameras set up way back into the crowd, and are getting in position here near the press area. We still have no evidence of President Reagan leaving the palace proper as yet. And Mr. Hague is on the far side of the podium, speaking with some of the people who have assembled here and are waiting for President Reagan to come down.
That Volksfest that's going on, looking at the time now, about 11 or 12 minutes past the hour, I suppose most of that will happen after Mr. Reagan leaves.
Yeah, certainly everyone is waiting to hear what he has to say at this particular point. You know, it's actually strange to see so many people here at the Schloss. For anyone who's familiar with Berlin, they know that directly across from the palace are a lot of very nice little restaurants and evening spots. And we've often come here in the past and remarked at how quiet and how stately the palace itself looks, and that indeed is not the case. Which also reminds me of something the president said at Tempelhof when he said a lot of people regard their jobs as routine. And today is certainly not a routine day of duty overseas. Not by any stretch of the imagination. President Reagan has just come out of the Charlottenburg Palace right now with Mayor von Weizsäcker and Mrs. Reagan right there with him in the front rank, and the dignitaries are proceeding up to the podium. I imagine that we'll be rolling right into the speeches in just a few short minutes.
Meine Damen und Herren, der Präsident der Vereinigten Staaten ist soeben bei uns eingetroffen.
The German announcer has just introduced President Reagan. He's stepping up to the front of the podium with Mrs. Reagan. The governing mayor, Dr. von Weizsäcker, behind him, Chancellor Schmidt as well.
That big flag there reminds me of the big flag in the newspaper that they had printed for people to display on their cars.
Exactly, yes. President still standing, saying hello to some people, and now has been seated. It looks like the speeches will be getting underway. Secretary Hague is now on the podium as well.
Jim Wyatt is standing by here. Rick with us in the studio, and he will be providing that translation of Mayor von Weizsäcker. Apparently, Chancellor Schmidt will not be speaking here. This apparently is going to be a local affair hosted by the mayor. Dr. Richard von Weizsäcker standing at the lectern now.
Wir Berliner begrüßen Sie, Herr Präsident, und Sie, verehrte Mrs. Reagan, von ganzem Herzen in unserer Stadt.
We Berliners, Mr. President, greet you to our city with our wholehearted welcome.
Wir sind glücklich und dankbar, dass Sie zu uns gekommen sind. Und ich begrüße mit Ihnen Außenminister Hague und Gattin und alle Mitglieder Ihrer Delegation aufs Herzlichste.
And all members of your delegation I wish to greet most heartfully.
Mit Ihrem Besuch bekräftigen Sie das Engagement der Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika in Berlin.
Your visit to us
Wie niemand sonst
proves your engagement
am
with our
eigenen
city
Leib
and its
die
inhabitants.
Großzügigkeit und die Freiheitsliebe des amerikanischen Volkes erfahren.
And it also
Als
proves the
Sieger
love of freedom
waren Sie
and the willingness to fight for freedom
1945 nach
of the
Berlin
Americans.
gekommen. Dann aber, als der freie Teil der Stadt durch Blockade ausgehungert und unterworfen werden sollte, dann haben Sie mit Ihren britischen und französischen Verbündeten
You, Mr. President,
sofort
along
den
with the
Schutz
French
der
and
Berliner
British
übernommen.
allies, prevented this city from being
In schwerer
hungered during the
Zeit
blockade that tried to cut us off from all of our supplies in the West. And we're thankful for you,
In
for you
schwerer
for that.
Zeit haben Sie sich für unsere Freiheit eingesetzt. Dabei haben Sie auch die unbeugsame Haltung der Berliner Bevölkerung.
You have worked very hard for the freedom of this city, and you have earned all the trust
So wurden hier in Berlin
of
aus
all
Gegnern
Berliners.
Freunde. Damit wurde hier in dieser Stadt der Grundstein für den späteren Beitritt der Bundesrepublik Deutschland in die Atlantische Gemeinschaft gelegt.
You laid the stone for freedom for this city and for the freedom of all of Germany.
Wir Berliner vergessen nicht, dass wir in der Stunde der Not Freunde hatten.
You came to us and
Wir
helped us
wissen,
during the time
dass
of
es Ihr Schutz
need
ist, der unsere Freiheit sichert.
and helped us secure
Daher
our freedom.
bleibt die besondere Aufgabe
This is the
und die Verantwortung der
particular-
Berliner, unsere Gemeinschaft und Freundschaft zu festigen. Hier in Berlin hat die freie Welt ihre Bewährungsprobe bestanden.
Here in Berlin, the free world has stood up to its tests and trials.
Fähigkeit zu Ausgleich und Verständigung erwiesen. Das Vier-Mächte-Abkommen von Berlin, an dessen Zustandekommen Amerika führend beteiligt war, ist dafür ein Beweis. Das Abkommen, seit 10 Jahren in Kraft, hat sich als ein Dokument des Ausgleichs zwischen Ost und West trotz gegensätzlicher Interessen und Absichten in seinen Grundzügen bewährt.
Has proven to be worthwhile, even though there have been troubles on both sides in the last 10 years.
Bei den bevorstehenden Gesprächen und Verhandlungen mit der Sowjetunion ein ähnlicher Erfolg gelingt. Aus allen Teilen der Stadt begleiten Sie dabei unsere guten Wünsche.
All the people of both parts of our city greet you very heartily.
Wir wollen auch in Zukunft von Berlin aus zeigen, dass sich die Festigkeit unserer Überzeugungen mit der Bereitschaft zu praktischen Regelungen trotz gegensätzlicher Systeme in Ost und West verbinden lässt. Wir wollen erhalten, was erreicht wurde, und wir wollen weiterarbeiten für einen friedlichen Wandel zur Freiheit. Aber niemand weiß besser als wir in Berlin, dass die grundlegende Übereinstimmung in der atlantischen Gemeinschaft die Bedingung für jedes Bemühen einer Verständigung mit dem Osten ist. Rüstungen gibt es in Ost und West. Nicht die Waffensysteme sind es, welche die beiden Systeme grundlegend unterscheiden, sondern es ist die Idee von Freiheit und Menschenrecht.
And we wish to be carried from the idea of freedom and humanity.
Diese Idee ist es, die uns mit dem amerikanischen Volk zutiefst verbindet und die den Respekt und die Überzeugungskraft der atlantischen Gemeinschaft begründet.
And it's also the base
In
of the
unserem Teil der
Atlantic
Stadt
Alliance.
ist die Freiheit der Wahl, die Freiheit zur Meinungsäußerung,
The freedom
die Freiheit
to vote,
zum
the
Andersdenken
freedom
geschützt.
of opinion, the freedom to
Weil
have
bei
different
uns
opinions.
Parlamente und Regierungen frei gewählt sind, deshalb darf bei uns auch mit friedlichen Mitteln gegen sie demonstriert werden. Wenn erst einmal auf der anderen Seite der Mauer das
Our three
demokratische
governments have been freely
Kritik
voted,
anerkannt und geschützt wird,
but on
dann
the other
wird
side of the wall,
jenes unmenschliche Bauwerk nicht mehr notwendig sein.
the government was not freely elected and does not allow people to freely voice their opinions.
In diesem Sinne möchten Ihnen, Herr Präsident, dessen bin ich ganz sicher, auch viele Deutsche von jenseits der Mauer ihre
I would like to
herzlichen
assure you, Mr.
Grüße
President, that
übermitteln.
many Germans on the other side of the wall also greet you and welcome your presence in our city.
Wir aber, die wir dank Ihres Schutzes die Freiheit haben, wir kennen unsere Verantwortung. Berlin bleibt Symbol für den Freiheitswillen der Demokratie.
Berlin remains a symbol of democracy.
Über die Zukunft der Freiheit
Despite the wall,
da schauen Sie auf den Selbstbehauptungswillen der Berliner. Und die Berliner sind bereit, für die Idee von der Würde eines jeden einzelnen
the
Menschen
Berliners are
einzutreten.
prepared for the
Dies ist
humanity
unsere
and the rights of
ständige
every individual
Aufgabe
person
für die
to fight
Gemeinschaft der freien Völker.
for
Es
the
ist der Dank und
common
die Gegenleistung der
good of all
Berliner
peoples.
dafür, dass Sie unsere Freiheit schützen.
And we are thankful to you that you are protecting our freedom.
Junge Menschen haben ihre Ideale
Young people
und
have their
träumen
ideals
von ihrer
and their dreams,
Verwirklichung.
and dreams
Auch
of
wir Älteren
realizing
haben
their
unsere
dreams.
Träume gehabt, als wir jung waren, und wir haben die
Older
Sehnsucht
people also
im
had our
Herzen
dreams
lebendig
and our
behalten.
yearnings, and we want to
Aber
keep our
wir
dreams
haben, als
alive.
wir älter wurden, gelernt,
But as we grow
dass es
older, we
gut
learn
ist, die Augen vor der Wirklichkeit nicht zu verschließen.
to keep our
Wir
eyes open
dienen
to
unseren
reality.
Idealen am besten, wenn wir die Wirklichkeit
we can
ernst nehmen.
realize our
Dann
ideals
können
in the
wir
best
der
way
Verantwortung
when we
der
keep
Freiheit
reality
gerecht werden.
in sight.
Amerika hat im Herzen der Berliner einen unverrückbar festen Platz. Die Namen
Berlin
ihrer
has a very
Amtsvorgänger
strong
im
priority
Goldenen
in the
Buch
sense of the
von
Americans.
Berlin, die uns in den zurückliegenden 20 Jahren besucht haben, sie bezeugen es.
The past presidents
Ich
who have
bitte Sie,
visited
Herr
Berlin in the last
Präsident,
20 years are
uns
a
die Ehre
proof
zu
this fact.
erweisen, sich in dieses Buch einzutragen. Mit Ihrer Unterschrift besiegeln Sie die tiefe Übereinstimmung, die unsere Völker
When you sign the
über
guest
alle
book here,
Entfernungen
you also
und
prove
Stürme der Zeit hinweg
your commitment
verbindet.
to Berlin, as did all of past
In Bonn
presidents who
haben
visited
Sie
our city.
Gespräche mit der Bundesregierung geführt
You've talked to the
und ich nutze die
Bundesregierung, the
Gelegenheit,
federal government,
hier den Bundeskanzler unserer Bundesrepublik Deutschland Helmut Schmidt und den Bundesaußenminister
And in your
Hans-Dietrich Genscher
with Helmut
herzlich
Schmidt,
und
our
dankbar
Chancellor,
willkommen zu
and our
heißen.
Foreign Minister Genscher, proven the solidarity of our ideals.
Sie, Herr Präsident, haben vor dem Deutschen Bundestag vorgestern gesagt,
The day before yesterday, Mr. President, you
Germany,
said in
you are
front
not
of
alone.
the Bundestag, Germany will
Im
not be
Namen der
alone.
Berliner möchte ich Ihnen
In the name
dafür
of all
herzlich
Berliners,
danken. Und
Berliners,
ich
I would
möchte
also like to thank you.
hinzufügen, America, we are happy to have you as an ally and a friend. Together we will maintain freedom and peace.
And I would also like to say to you, we are happy to have you here, and we will maintain freedom and peace.
Mr. President, Mrs. Reagan,
Mr. President,
Herr
Mr.
Regierender
Reagan,
Bürgermeister,
Mr. Mayor,
liebe Berlinerinnen und Berliner.
Berliners,
Ihr Besuch in Berlin, Herr Präsident,
your visit to Berlin,
ist
Mr.
für
President,
alle hier auf diesem Platz, für alle in Berlin, für alle Deutschen ein Signal der Zuversicht.
is a signal of trust to
Und
all
wir
Berliners
danken
and
Ihnen
everyone in our
dafür,
city.
dass Sie zum Abschluss Ihrer Europareise hierher nach Berlin gekommen sind.
And it's meaningful that you are coming to Berlin at the end of your trip to Europe.
Diese Stadt weist jeden ihrer Besucher eindringlich auf die ungelöste deutsche Frage hin,
The city points to the
auf die für
unresolved
alle
German
Deutschen
question,
schmerzliche Teilung
the
unseres
painful division
Vaterlandes.
of our country.
Die Mauer, die Sie gesehen haben, Herr Präsident,
Mr. President, the wall that you have seen
symbolisiert
symbolizes
den Riss, der quer durch diese Stadt geht,
the
der durch
breakage
unsere
that goes
Nation geht
through our city,
und durch das
that goes through our
Empfinden
country,
jedes Deutschen. Ihr Besuch setzt eine Tradition fort, Herr Präsident, die uns Deutschen und die vor allem den Berlinern sehr wertvoll ist und die ihnen am Herzen liegt. Auch Ihre Vorgänger im Amte haben durch Ihre Besuche hier in Berlin
your
die
predecessors
Entschlossenheit der amerikanischen Nation, die Entschlossenheit der Vereinigten Staaten von Amerika bekräftigt, die Freiheit dieser Stadt ebenso zu verteidigen
Your predecessors' visits
wie
to
die
Berlin
Freiheit ihrer
also
eigenen Bürger.
proved your willingness to
Die
defend the
amerikanischen
freedom of the
Truppen in
city.
Berlin
The American troops in Berlin
sind der handgreifliche Beweis
are a very
für diese
concrete
Bereitschaft.
proof for your willingness,
Diese
for this
Soldaten
willingness. These
und ihre
soldiers
Familien
and their families,
und ebenso gilt das für ihre französischen und britischen Kameraden und deren Familien in
and just
Berlin.
as well as the French and
Sie
the British troops and their families,
Und sie bleiben als Freunde
are here
willkommen.
and are welcome and remain as friends.
Die Berliner und wir alle
The Berliners
sind
and
Ihnen
all of
dankbar
us
für Ihren Dienst
are thankful for their
an
service
dieser Stadt.
to this
Und die
city.
Berliner selbst tun ihr Bestes,
And the Berliners themselves are doing their
damit
best
sich Ihre Soldaten und Ihre Familien hier
so that your
wohlfühlen.
soldiers and their families feel
Und wenn nun
welcome
auch
in our city.
einige Demonstranten
And when a couple of demonstrators
aus Anlass Ihres Besuches
are demonstrating
ihrer Meinung
of your visit are demonstrating
so
their own
können die
opinion,
doch ihr demokratisches Grundrecht nur deshalb wahrnehmen, weil
They can
Ihre
only
Soldaten diese Freiheit
out
und dieses Grundrecht schützen.
basic democratic right of saying their opinion only because you are here to defend that right.
Die Berliner leben auf einer Insel der Freiheit.
Live on an island
Und
of
Sie, Herr
freedom.
Präsident,
And you, Mr. President,
haben jüngst in einer bei uns in Europa nicht nur mit Interesse, sondern mit großer innerer Zustimmung
and your speech that was welcomed throughout of all of Europe with much
Ihrem
excitement,
alten College daran erinnert, dass der Westen nur dank seiner Einigkeit
that you
seine
mentioned
Rechte in Berlin sichern kann.
that the West can only defend its rights in Berlin because of unity.
Ich knüpfe an bei
I'd
einer
like to add
Bemerkung, die der regierende Bürgermeister eben gemacht hat,
to a
und
comment that
füge
the
hinzu,
mayor just
Berlin
made,
ist auch ein Beispiel dafür,
that Berlin is also an example
dass zur Verbesserung der Lage in der Welt und zur Aufrechterhaltung des Friedens in der Welt zwei Dinge
that two things are necessary
notwendig sind.
to maintain freedom in Berlin and in the
Erstens,
world. Firstly,
Festigkeit und Entschlossenheit
firmness and decisiveness,
und zweitens
and secondly,
Gespräch und Verhandlung und Vertrag.
talks,
Es
negotiations,
ist noch
and
nicht
contracts.
lange her,
It hasn't been
dass
long
Berlin ein Krisenherd
that
war.
Berlin was a
Heute
crisis.
ist die Lage in dieser Stadt und
Today,
um diese Stadt
The
insgesamt
situation in the city
stabil dank
and
dem
around the
Abkommen
city
der vier
become
Mächte
more stable
vom
thanks
3. September 1971. Dieses
to the
Abkommen
four-power
hat
agreement
sich bewährt.
of 1971. The four-power agreement has proved itself.
Echte Entspannung ist möglich, wenn Festigkeit
Real détente
und
is
geduldiges
possible
Verhandeln
if
zusammentreffen.
firmness, decisiveness,
Die Einheit
and
des Westens,
negotiations are all
die das Nordatlantische Bündnis gestern in Bonn abermals bekräftigt hat, lässt uns an die Zukunft Berlins glauben.
Your speech yesterday
Wir danken Ihnen, Herr Präsident,
let us believe in the future of our
für
city.
Ihren Besuch.
We thank you for your visit.
Wir, die Berliner,
We, the Berliners,
wir Deutsche insgesamt
and all of us Germans
in allen Teilen Deutschlands.
in all parts of Germany, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ich danke Ihnen vielmals. Thank you. Mr. Governing Mayor, Mr. Chancellor, Excellencies, you ladies and gentlemen, it was one of Germany's greatest sons, Goethe, who said that there is strong shadow where there is much light. In our times, Berlin, more than any other place in the world, is such a meeting place of light and shadow, tyranny and freedom. To be here is truly to stand on freedom's edge and in the shadow of a wall that has come to symbolize all that is darkest in the world today. To sense how shining and priceless and how much in need of constant vigilance and protection our legacy of liberty is. This day marks a happy return for us. We paid our first visit to this great city more than 3 years ago as private citizens.
Herr Regierender Bürgermeister, Herr Bundeskanzler, Exzellenzen, meine Damen und Herren. Es war einer der größten Söhne Deutschlands, Goethe, der gesagt hat, wo viel Licht ist, ist starker Schatten. In unseren Zeiten ist Berlin mehr als jeder andere Ort der Welt ein solcher Treffpunkt von Licht und Schatten, Tyrannei und Freiheit. Hier in Berlin zu sein, heißt wahrhaftig am Rande der Freiheit und im Schatten einer Mauer zu stehen, die zum Symbol der schwärzesten Schatten in der heutigen Welt geworden ist, und zu spüren, wie leuchtend und unbezahlbar unser Erbe der Freiheit ist und wie sehr sie der ständigen Wachsamkeit und des ständigen Schutzes bedarf. Dieser Tag bedeutet für mich eine glückliche Rückkehr. Wir starteten dieser großen Stadt vor über 3 Jahren als Privatbürger unseren ersten Besuch ab.
As with every other citizen to Berlin, or visitor to Berlin, I came away with a vivid impression of a city that is more than a place on the map. A city that is a testament to what is both most inspiring and most troubling about the time we live in. Thomas Mann once wrote that a man lives not only his personal life as an individual, but also consciously or unconsciously the life of his epoch. Nowhere is this more true than in Berlin, where each moment of everyday life is spent against the backdrop of contending global systems and ideas. To be a Berliner is to live the great historic struggle of this age, the latest chapter in man's timeless quest for freedom.
Und wie jeder andere Berlin-Besucher kehrte ich mit dem lebendigen Eindruck einer Stadt nach Hause zurück, die mehr ist als nur ein Punkt auf der Landkarte. Eine Stadt, die ein bleibendes Zeugnis beider Seiten unserer Zeit darstellt. Das, was uns am meisten erhebt und das, was uns am meisten bedrückt. Thomas Mann schrieb einmal, der Mensch lebt nicht nur sein persönliches Leben als Einzelwesen, sondern bewusst oder unbewusst auch das seiner Epoche und Zeitgenossenschaft. Nirgendwo gilt dies mehr als in Berlin, wo jeder Augenblick des täglichen Lebens vor dem Hintergrund konkurrierender Weltsysteme und Ideen stattfindet. Ein Berliner zu sein, heißt in dem großen historischen Kampf dieses Zeitalters, im jüngsten Kapitel im zeitlosen Streben des Menschen nach Freiheit zu leben.
As Americans, we understand this. Our commitment to Berlin is a lasting one. Thousands of our citizens have served here since the first small contingent of American troops arrived on July 4th, 1945, the anniversary of our independence as a nation. Americans have served here ever since, not as conquerors, but as guardians of the freedom of West Berlin and its brave, proud people.
Als Amerikaner verstehen wir dies. Unsere Verpflichtung gegenüber Berlin ist eine dauerhafte Verpflichtung. Tausende unserer Bürger haben hier Dienst getan, seit das erste kleine Kontingent amerikanischer Truppen am 4. Juli 1945, dem Jahrestag unserer eigenen Unabhängigkeit als Nation, hier eingetroffen sind. Seither haben Amerikaner ständig ihr Dienst getan, nicht als Eroberer, sondern als Hüter der Freiheit Westberlins und seiner tapferen und stolzen Einwohner.
Today I want to pay tribute to my fellow countrymen, military and civilian, who serve their country and the people of Berlin, and in so doing stand as sentinels of freedom everywhere. I also wish to pay my personal respect to the people of this great city. My visit here today is proof that this American commitment has been worthwhile. Our freedom is indivisible.
Heute möchte ich meinen amerikanischen Mitbürgern im militärischen und im zivilen Bereich, die den USA und der Bevölkerung von Berlin und damit als Schildwache der Freiheit für alle dienen, meinen Lob und meinen Dank aussprechen.
The American commitment to Berlin is much deeper than our military presence here. In the 37 years since World War II, a succession of American presidents has made it clear that our role in Berlin is emblematic of our larger search for peace throughout Europe and the world. 10 years ago this month, that search brought into force the Quadripartite Agreement on Berlin. A decade later, West Berliners live more securely, can travel more freely, and most significantly, have more contact with friends and relatives in East Berlin and East Germany than was possible 10 years ago. These achievements reflect the realistic approach of Allied negotiators who recognize that practical progress can be made even while basic differences remain between East and West.
Ich möchte auch der Bevölkerung dieser großen Stadt meine persönliche Hochachtung ausdrücken. Mein heutiger Besuch hier ist Beweis dafür, dass sich diese amerikanische Verpflichtung gelohnt hat. Unsere Freiheit ist unteilbar. Die amerikanische Verpflichtung geht weit tiefer als unsere militärische Präsenz. In den 37 Jahren seit Ende des Zweiten Weltkriegs haben amerikanische Präsidenten immer wieder klargemacht, dass unsere Rolle in Berlin Sinnbild für unser gesamtes Streben nach Frieden in ganz Europa und in der Welt ist. Es ist diesen Monat 10 Jahre her, seit dieses Streben zum Inkrafttreten des Vier-Mächte-Abkommens für Berlin geführt hat. Heute, ein Jahrzehnt später, leben die Westberliner sicherer, können freier reisen und haben, was noch wichtiger ist, mehr Kontakte zu Freunden und Verwandten in Ostberlin und in Ostdeutschland, als dies vor 10 Jahren möglich war. Diese Ergebnisse spiegeln die realistische Einstellung der alliierten Unterhändler wider, die erkannten, dass praktischer Fortschritt erzielt werden kann, selbst wenn grundlegende Unterschiede zwischen Ost und West bestehen bleiben.
As a result, both sides have managed to handle their differences in Berlin without the clash of arms, to the benefit of all mankind. The United States remains committed to the Berlin Agreement. We will continue to expect strict observance and full implementation in all aspects of this accord, including those which apply to the eastern sector of Berlin. But if we are heartened by the partial progress achieved in Berlin, other developments make us aware of the growing military power and expansionism of the Soviet Union. Instead of working with the West to reduce tensions and erase the danger of war, the Soviet Union is engaged in the greatest military buildup in the history of the world. It has used its newfound might to ruthlessly pursue its goals around the world.
Als Ergebnis ist es beiden Seiten gelungen, ihre Differenzen in Berlin zum Segen der ganzen Menschheit ohne einen bewaffneten Zusammenstoß zu regeln. Die Vereinigten Staaten bleiben dem Berlin-Abkommen verpflichtet. Wir werden weiterhin die strikte Einhaltung und volle Verwirklichung aller Aspekte dieses Abkommens erwarten, einschließlich jener, die für den Ostsektor Berlins gelten. Obwohl wir über den in Berlin erreichten teilweisen Fortschritt erfreut sind, so lassen uns aber andere Entwicklungen der zunehmenden militärischen Macht und des Expansionismus der Sowjetunion bewusst werden. Statt mit dem Westen daran zu arbeiten, Spannungen abzubauen, um die Kriegsgefahr zu beseitigen, hat die Sowjetunion die größte militärische Aufrüstung in der Weltgeschichte unternommen. Sie hat ihre neu gewonnene Macht dazu benutzt, rücksichtslos ihre Ziele in der ganzen Welt zu verfolgen.
As the sad case of Afghanistan proves, the Soviet Union has not always respected the precious right of national sovereignty it is committed to uphold as a signatory of the United Nations Charter. And only one day's auto ride from here, in the great city of Warsaw, a courageous people suffer because they dared to strive for the very fundamental human rights which that Helsinki Final Act proclaimed. The citizens of free Berlin appreciate better than anyone the importance of Allied unity in the face of such challenges. 10 years after the Berlin Agreement, the hope it engendered for lasting peace remains a hope rather than a certainty. But the hopes of free people, be they German or American, are stubborn things.
Wie das traurige Beispiel Afghanistans beweist, hat die Sowjetunion keineswegs immer das kostbare Recht der nationalen Souveränität respektiert. Das zu bewahren sie als Signatarstaat der Charta der Vereinten Nationen verpflichtet ist. Und nur eine Tagereise mit dem Auto von hier, in der großen Stadt Warschau, leidet ein mutiges Volk, weil es gewagt hat, nach den grundlegendsten Menschenrechten zu streben, die in jener Schlussakte von Helsinki verkündet werden. Die Bürger des freien Berlin wissen die Bedeutung der Einheit des Bündnisses angesichts solcher Herausforderungen besser zu schätzen als irgendjemand sonst. 10 Jahre nach dem Berliner Abkommen ist die Hoffnung auf dauerhaften Frieden, die es geweckt hat, mehr eine Hoffnung als eine Gewissheit geblieben. Aber die Hoffnungen freier Menschen, seien sie Deutsche oder Amerikaner, sind sehr schwer zu ersticken.
We will not be lulled or bullied into fatalism, into resignation. We believe that progress for just and lasting peace can be made, that substantial areas of agreement can be reached with potential adversaries when the forces of freedom act with firmness, unity, and a sincere willingness to negotiate. To succeed at the negotiating table, we Allies have learned that a healthy military balance is a necessity. Yesterday, the other NATO heads of government and I agreed that it is essential to preserve and strengthen such a military balance. And let there be no doubt, the United States will continue to honor its commitment to Berlin.
Wir werden uns nicht in Fatalismus oder in Resignation hineinreden oder hineinzwingen lassen. Wir sind der Überzeugung, dass Fortschritt zu einem gerechten und dauerhaften Frieden erzielt werden kann. Dass wesentliche Gebiete der Übereinstimmung mit potenziellen Gegnern gefunden werden können, wenn die Kräfte der Freiheit mit Festigkeit und Einigkeit handeln und mit ernsthaftem Verhandlungswillen vorgehen. Wir Verbündete haben gelernt, dass ein gesundes militärisches Gleichgewicht notwendig ist, um am Verhandlungstisch Erfolg zu haben. Gestern sind die anderen Regierungschefs der NATO und ich übereingekommen, dass es wesentlich ist, ein solches militärisches Gleichgewicht zu erhalten und zu stärken. Und hieran soll niemand zweifeln. Die Vereinigten Staaten werden weiterhin ihre Verpflichtung gegenüber Berlin einhalten.
Our forces will remain here as long as necessary to preserve the peace and protect the freedom of the people of Berlin. For us, the American presence in Berlin, as long as it is needed, is not a burden. It is a sacred trust. Ours is a defensive mission. We pose no threat to those who live on the other side of the wall, but we do extend a challenge, a new Berlin initiative to the leaders of the Soviet bloc. It is a challenge for peace. We challenge the men in the Kremlin to join with us in the quest for peace, security, and a lowering of the tensions and weaponry that could lead to future conflict. We challenge the Soviet Union, as we proposed last year, to eliminate their SS-20, SS-4, and SS-5 missiles. If Chairman Brezhnev agrees to this, we stand ready to forego all of our ground-launched cruise missiles and Pershing II missiles.
Unsere Streitkräfte werden so lange hier bleiben wie notwendig, um den Frieden zu erhalten und die Freiheit der Bevölkerung von Berlin zu schützen. Für uns ist die amerikanische Präsenz in Berlin, solange sie notwendig ist, keine Last, sondern eine unumstößliche Verpflichtung. Unser Auftrag hier ist ein Verteidigungsauftrag. Wir stellen keine Bedrohung für jene Menschen dar, die auf der anderen Seite der Mauer leben. Ich möchte die Führer des Sowjetblocks zu etwas herausfordern, einer neuen Berlin-Initiative. Sie ist eine Aufforderung zum Frieden. Wir fordern Sie auf, sich uns anzuschließen in unseren Bemühungen um den Frieden, die Sicherheit und den Abbau der Spannungen und derjenigen Waffenarsenale, die zu einem künftigen Konflikt führen könnten. Wir fordern die Sowjetunion auf, wie wir es im vorigen Jahr vorgeschlagen haben, ihre SS-20, SS-4 und SS-5 Raketen abzubauen. Wenn Präsident Brezhnev dem zustimmt, sind wir bereit, auf alle unsere landgestützten Marschflugkörper und Pershing II Raketen zu verzichten.
We challenge the Soviet Union, as NATO proposed yesterday, to slash the conventional ground forces of the Warsaw Pact and NATO in Central Europe to 700,000 men each, and the total ground and air forces of the two alliances to 900,000 men each. And we challenge the Soviet Union to live up to its signature its leader placed on the Helsinki Treaty, so that the basic human rights of Soviet and Eastern European people will be respected. A positive response to these sincere and reasonable points from the Soviet, these calls for conciliation instead of confrontation, could open the door for a conference on disarmament in Europe.
Wir fordern die Sowjetunion, wie die NATO gestern vorgeschlagen hat, auf, die konventionellen Landstreitkräfte des Warschauer Paktes und der NATO in Mitteleuropa auf jeweils 700.000 Mann zu verringern und die Gesamtstärke der Land- und Luftstreitkräfte der beiden Bündnisse auf jeweils 900.000 Mann. Und wir fordern die Sowjetunion auf, sich an das zu halten, was ihre Führer durch ihre Unterschrift in Helsinki bestätigt haben, nämlich die grundlegenden Menschenrechte des sowjetischen Volkes und der osteuropäischen Völker zu achten. Eine positive Antwort der Sowjets auf diese ernsthaften, ausgewogenen Vorschläge, diesen Appell zur Versöhnung statt zur Konfrontation, könnte die Tür zu einer Konferenz über Abrüstung in Europa öffnen.
We Americans are optimists, but we are also realists. We're a peaceful people, but we're not a weak or gullible people. So we look with hope to the Soviet Union's response, but we expect positive actions rather than rhetoric as the first proof of Soviet good intentions. We expect that the response to my Berlin Initiative for Peace will demonstrate finally that the Soviet Union is serious about working to reduce tensions in other parts of the world as they have been able to do here in Berlin. Peace, it has been said, is more than the absence of armed conflict. Reducing military forces alone will not automatically guarantee the long-term prospects for peace.
Die Amerikaner sind Optimisten, aber wir sind auch Realisten. Wir sind friedfertige Menschen, aber schwach oder leichtgläubig sind wir nicht. Wir sehen also mit Hoffnung der Antwort der Sowjetunion entgegen, aber wir erwarten positive Handlungen, nicht bloße Worte, als ersten Beweis der guten Absichten der Sowjets. Wir erwarten, dass die Antwort auf meine Berliner Friedensinitiative endlich den Beweis dafür liefern wird, dass die Sowjetunion ernsthaft mitarbeiten will, die Spannungen in anderen Teilen der Welt abzubauen, wie sie dazu hier in Berlin fähig war. Frieden, so heißt es, ist mehr als nur Abwesenheit eines bewaffneten Konflikts. Eine Verringerung der Streitkräfte allein wird nicht automatisch die langfristigen Aussichten auf Frieden garantieren.
Several times in the 1950s and 60s, the world went to the brink of war over Berlin. Those confrontations did not come because of military forces or operations alone. They arose because the Soviet Union refused to allow the free flow of peoples and ideas between East and West. And they came because the Soviet authorities and their minions repressed millions of citizens in Eastern Germany who did not wish to live under a communist dictatorship. So I want to concentrate the second part of America's new Berlin Initiative on ways to reduce the human barriers. Barriers as bleak and brutal as the Berlin Wall itself, which divide Europe today.
In den 50er und 60er Jahren ist die Welt für Berlin mehrmals bis an den Rand des Krieges gegangen. Streitkräfte oder militärische Bewegungen allein führten nicht zu jenen Konfrontationen. Sie entstanden, weil sich die Sowjetunion weigerte, den freien Fluss von Menschen und Ideen zwischen Ost und West zuzulassen. Und sie entstanden, weil die sowjetischen Behörden und ihre Günstlinge Millionen von Bürgern in Ostdeutschland unterdrückten, die nicht unter einer kommunistischen Diktatur leben wollten. So möchte ich mich im zweiten Teil der neuen Berlin-Initiativen Amerikas auf Mittel und Wege konzentrieren, die menschlichen Schranken abzubauen, Schranken so trostlos und brutal wie die Berliner Mauer selbst, Schranken, die heute Europa trennen.
If I had only one message to urge on the leaders of the Soviet bloc, it would be this. Think of your own coming generations. Look with me 10 years into the future when we will celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Berlin Agreement. What then will be the fruits of our efforts? Do the Soviet leaders want to be remembered for a prison wall ringed with barbed wire and armed guards whose weapons are aimed at innocent civilians, their own civilians? Do they want to conduct themselves in a way that will earn only the contempt of free peoples and the distrust of their own citizens? Or do they want to be remembered for having taken up our offer to use Berlin as a starting point for true efforts to reduce the human and political divisions which are the ultimate cause of every war?
Wenn ich den Führern des Sowjetblocks nur eine Botschaft ans Herz zu legen hätte, dann wäre es diese. Denkt an eure eigenen künftigen Generationen. Blickt mit mir 10 Jahre in die Zukunft, wenn wir den 20. Jahrestag des Berlin-Abkommens feiern werden. Was werden dann die Früchte unserer Bemühungen sein? Was wollen die sowjetischen Führer dann als ihr Denkmal sehen? Eine Gefängnismauer, umringt von Stacheldraht und bewaffneten Posten, deren Waffen auf unschuldige Zivilisten gerichtet sind, ihre eigenen Bürger? Wollen sie sich weiterhin so verhalten, dass sie nur die Verachtung freier Menschen und das Misstrauen ihrer eigenen Bürger ernten werden? Oder wollen Sie, dass man sich ihrer erinnert, weil sie unser Angebot angenommen haben? Berlin als einen Ausgangspunkt für echte Anstrengungen zum Abbau der menschlichen und politischen Spaltungen zu benutzen, die die letztliche Ursache jedes Krieges sind.
We in the West have made our choice. America and our allies welcome peaceful competition in ideas, in economics, and in all facets of human activity. We seek no advantage, we covet no territory, and we wish to force no ideology or way of life on others. The time has come, 10 years after the Berlin Agreement, to fulfill the promise it seemed to offer at its dawn. I call on President Brezhnev to join me in a sincere effort to translate the dashed hopes of the 1970s into the reality of a safer and freer Europe in the 1980s. I am determined to assure that our civilization averts the catastrophe of a nuclear war.
Wir im Westen haben unsere Wahl getroffen. Amerika und seine Verbündeten begrüßen den friedlichen Wettstreit in Ideen, in der Wirtschaft und in allen Bereichen der menschlichen Tätigkeit. Wir erstreben keinen Vorteil. Wir begehren kein anderes Territorium. Und wir wollen anderen keine Ideologie oder Lebensform aufzwingen. 10 Jahre nach dem Berliner Abkommen ist die Zeit gekommen, das Versprechen zu erfüllen, das es zu seinem Beginn zu bieten schien. Ich fordere Präsident Brezhnev auf, sich mir in einer ernsthaften Bemühung anzuschließen, die enttäuschten Hoffnungen der 70er Jahre in die Wirklichkeit eines sichereren und freieren Europas der 80er Jahre umzusetzen. Ich bin entschlossen, alles nur Mögliche zu tun, unserer Zivilisation die Katastrophe eines Atomkriegs zu ersparen.
Stability depends primarily on the maintenance of a military balance which offers no temptation to an aggressor. And the arms control proposals which I have made are designed to enhance deterrence and achieve stability at substantially lower and equal force levels. At the same time, other measures might be negotiated between the United States and the Soviet Union to reinforce the peace and help reduce the possibility of a nuclear conflict. These include measures to enhance mutual confidence and to improve communication both in time of peace and in a crisis. Past agreements have created a hotline between Moscow and Washington, established measures to reduce the danger of nuclear accidents, and provided for notification of some missile launches. We are now studying other concrete and practical steps to help further reduce the risk of a nuclear conflict, which I intend to explore with the Soviet Union. It is time we went further to avert the risk of war through accident or misunderstanding.
Stabilität hängt in erster Linie von der Aufrechterhaltung eines militärischen Gleichgewichts ab, das einen Aggressor nicht in Versuchung führt. Und die Rüstungskontrollvorschläge, die ich gemacht habe, dienen dazu, die Abschreckung zu stärken und Stabilität auf einem wesentlich niedrigeren und gleichen Stand der Streitkräfte zu erreichen. Gleichzeitig könnte zwischen den Vereinigten Staaten und der Sowjetunion über andere Maßnahmen verhandelt werden, die den Frieden stärken und dazu beitragen, die Möglichkeit eines nuklearen Konflikts zu verringern. Dazu gehören Maßnahmen zur Förderung des gegenseitigen Vertrauens und zur Verbesserung der Kommunikation sowohl in Friedens- wie in Kriegszeiten. Frühere Abkommen haben den heißen Draht zwischen Moskau und Washington geschaffen, Maßnahmen zur Verringerung der Gefahr eines unbeabsichtigten Ausbruchs eines Kernwaffenkrieges eingeführt und die Ankündigung bestimmter Raketenstarts vorgesehen. Wir prüfen jetzt andere konkrete und praktische Schritte, um zu einer weiteren Verringerung des Risikos eines nuklearen Konflikts beizutragen. Ich habe vor, dies mit der Sowjetunion weiter zu verfolgen. Und es ist an der Zeit, noch weitergehende Schritte zu unternehmen, um das Risiko eines Krieges durch Zufall oder Missverständnisse auszuschalten.
We shortly will approach the Soviet Union with proposals in such areas as notification of strategic exercises, of missile launches, and expanded exchange of strategic forces data. Taken together, these steps would represent a qualitative improvement in the nuclear environment. They would help reduce the chances of misinterpretation in the case of exercises and test launches, and they would reduce the secrecy and ambiguity which surround military activity. We are considering additional measures as well. We will be making these proposals in good faith to the Soviet Union. We hope that their response to this Berlin initiative, so appropriate to a city that is acutely conscious of the costs and risks of war, will be positive. A united, resolute Western alliance stands ready to defend itself if necessary. But we are also ready to work with the Soviet bloc in peaceful cooperation if the leaders of the East are willing to respond in kind.
Wir werden der Sowjetunion in Kürze Vorschläge unterbreiten, auf solchen Gebieten wie der Bekanntgabe strategischer Übungen, dem Abschuss von Raketen und eines erweiterten Austausches von Daten über strategische Streitkräfte. Zusammengenommen würden diese Schritte eine qualitative Verbesserung im nuklearen Bereich darstellen. Sie würden ferner dazu beitragen, die Möglichkeiten der Fehlinterpretation im Falle von Übungen und Raketenprobeschüssen zu verringern. Und sie würden die Geheimhaltung und Zweideutigkeit verringern, mit denen militärische Tätigkeiten umgeben sind. Und wir erwägen noch weitere Maßnahmen. Wir werden diese Vorschläge der Sowjetunion in gutem Glauben unterbreiten. Wir hoffen, dass Ihre Antwort auf diese Berlin-Initiative, benannt nach einer Stadt, die sich der Kosten und Risiken des Krieges ganz besonders bewusst ist, positiv sein werden. Ein einiges, entschlossenes westliches Bündnis steht bereit, sich, wenn notwendig, zu verteidigen. Aber wir sind ebenso bereit, mit dem Sowjetblock friedlich zusammenzuarbeiten, solange die Führer des Ostens bereit sind, dasselbe zu tun.
Let them remember the message of Schiller, that only he who has done his best for his own time has lived for all times. Let them join with us in our time to achieve a lasting peace and a better life for tomorrow's generations on both sides of that blighted wall. And let the Brandenburg Gate become a symbol not of two separate and hostile worlds, but an open door through which ideas, free ideas, and peaceful competition flourish. My final message is for the people of Berlin. Even before my first visit to your city, I felt a part of you, as all free men and women around the world do. We lived through the blockade and airlift with you. We witnessed the heroic reconstruction of a devastated city, and we watched the creation of your strong democratic institutions.
Ich darf die andere Seite an die Worte Schillers erinnern. Denn wer den Besten seiner Zeit genug getan, der hat gelebt für alle Zeiten. Sie sollten sich uns heute anschließen in dem Bemühen um einen dauerhaften Frieden und ein besseres Leben für die Generationen von morgen auf beiden Seiten dieser öden Mauer. Und das Brandenburger Tor soll dann ein Symbol werden, nicht für zwei getrennte und feindliche Welten, sondern ein offenes Tor, durch das freie Ideen und friedlicher Wettbewerb passieren können. Abschließend möchte ich mich noch einmal an die Menschen von Berlin wenden. Schon bei meinem ersten Besuch in Ihrer Stadt habe ich mich Ihnen zugehörig gefühlt, wie alle freien Frauen und Männer in der Welt. Sie haben die Blockade und die Luftbrücke mit Ihnen durchgestanden. Sie haben den heroischen Wiederaufbau einer verwüsteten Stadt erlebt. Sie haben gesehen, wie Sie starke und demokratische Institutionen geschaffen haben.
When I came here in 1978, I was deeply moved and proud of your success. What finer proof of what freedom can accomplish than the vibrant, prosperous island you've created in the midst of a hostile sea? Today, my reverence for your courage and accomplishment has grown even deeper. You are a constant inspiration for us all, for our hopes and ideals, and for the human qualities of courage, endurance, and faith that are the one secret weapon of the West no totalitarian regime can ever match. As long as Berlin exists, there can be no doubt about the hope for democracy. Yes, the hated wall still stands, but taller and stronger than that bleak barrier dividing East from West, free from oppressed, stands the character of the Berliners themselves. You have endured in your splendid city on the Spree, and my return visit has convinced me, in the words of the beloved old song, that Berlin bleibt doch Berlin. Berlin is still Berlin. We all remember John Kennedy's stirring words when he visited Berlin. I can only add that we in America and in the West are still Berliners too, and always will be. And I am proud to say today that it is good to be home again.
Als ich im Jahr 1978 hierher kam, war ich tief bewegt und stolz auf Ihren Erfolg. Welchen besseren Beweis könnte es geben, was Freiheit vollbringen kann, als die pulsierende, blühende Insel, die Sie inmitten eines feindlichen Meeres geschaffen haben? Heute ist meine Bewunderung für Ihren Mut und Ihre Leistung noch größer geworden. Sie sind für uns alle eine ständige Inspiration, für unsere Hoffnungen und Ideale und für die menschlichen Eigenschaften des Mutes, der Standhaftigkeit und des Glaubens, die die einzige Geheimwaffe des Westens sind, denen kein totalitäres Regime je etwas Gleichwertiges entgegensetzen kann. Solange Berlin besteht, kann es keinen Zweifel an der Hoffnung für die Demokratie geben. Sicher, die verhasste Mauer steht noch immer. Aber auf dieser Seite steht etwas, das diese trostlose Mauer überragt, die den Osten vom Westen und die Unterdrückten von den Freien trennt. Etwas, das stärker ist, nämlich der Charakter der Berliner. Sie haben in ihrer großartigen Stadt an der Spree durchgehalten und mein erneuter Besuch hat mich überzeugt, wie es in den Worten des beliebten alten Liedes heißt: Berlin bleibt doch Berlin. Wir alle erinnern uns an die bewegenden Worte John F. Kennedys, als er Berlin besuchte. Ich kann nur hinzufügen, dass wir in Amerika und im Westen noch immer Berliner sind und auch immer bleiben werden. Und ich sage dies mit Stolz, es ist schön, heute sich wieder hier zu Hause zu fühlen.
God bless you. Dankeschön.
Gott segne Sie alle und ich danke Ihnen.
This is the Golden Book signing that we talked about earlier. We said it normally takes place at the Schöneberg City Hall, but they moved it here for time and security reasons, apparently, so the President is putting the first signature in the newest Golden Book that will be signed by many presidents and leaders of foreign countries and other dignitaries after him. This is Reagan signing, too.
Monty, there was a positive...
Yes, Rick.
There was a positive sea of American flags at both the beginning and at the end of President Reagan's address here at the castle. He and Mrs. Reagan and the mayor, von Weizsäcker, Chancellor Schmidt, are all waving now to the crowds. Up go the flags once again. The waterfalls in the background at the palace gardens, shooting high into the air. It's a very, very good sight right now. A few German flags also in the audience. The President is now leaving the podium along with the other dignitaries, and they'll be going back through the palace proper itself.
It was a very powerful speech, I thought. Very, very emotional, very moving.
From the very beginning, it certainly was not ambiguous at all. Everyone knew exactly where the President was standing on the particular issues. Security people are now still on the podium. Of course, the security people on top of the palace are up and very watchful. It was kind of a weird feeling. I don't exactly know how to explain it, to be the only uniformed NCO at the gathering. While, of course, there were some other military people here, it's primarily a civilian happening, as it were. Peter Dole is still back into the festival area proper and where the Volksfest is taking place. And I wonder if, Peter, you could come in and describe to us what's happening in that particular area.
Well, Rick, people are starting to retreat, I guess. I hate to use that word. They're starting to leave. Very quiet it's been since this has been going on. The sea of American flags has mostly been, well, when it was a sea, there was a large, I suppose, a 15-foot flag. It was right in the middle, about 150 feet back from the front press lines. And right now, as the people leave, there were some tears, I noticed, back here when the President was speaking, or when the translator had translated for them. And it was rather an emotional thing for a lot of the locals here.
There was, excuse me, Peter, there was certainly a flurry of activity here at the American Press Center, where the various networks had their correspondents writing feverishly and filing reports all along as the President was speaking and picking out particular parts. We did see Sam Donaldson here from ABC News and also Tom Brokaw. And people are still filing reports, getting ready to follow the President now.
Meine Damen und Herren, für den Berliner, unser Gartenfest geht nun weiter. Wir bieten Ihnen in den nächsten 2 Stunden Musik und Unterhaltung im Schlosspark und rund um den Gartenbereich.
So, as he files out of there, Rick and Peter, he will head for his chopper to go back to Tempelhof Airport for takeoff. I wonder how long he is going to remain there at Charlottenburg.
We have no idea of that right now. Of course, the German announcer has just come on and said there'll be 2 hours now of festival, and the bands will be playing again. We did just get word that it looks like the President will be here for about 20 more minutes before he departs the Charlottenburg Palace itself. They are all filing into the wing, West Wing now, the Charlottenburg Palace.
So he will enjoy, apparently, some of the festive activity.
Probably his share of the 300-pound cake, I would imagine.
Did you gentlemen get any sight of that cake? I was curious about that. For those folks who are not aware of it, this baker I talked about earlier, one of the restaurants on the world-famous boulevard in Berlin, the Kurfürstendamm, had baked a 300-pound cake in honor of the President's visit. It was a replica of the Capitol building in Washington.
That's incredible.
Having been here since early this morning, we were looking for the cake even more furiously than you were, Monty.
I don't think they'd trust that out here.
It is, I'm sure, in the area of the wing of the Charlottenburg Palace where they have a sort of buffet and reception center set up.
What is it like outside where the fest is to be held?
Well, Monty, outside there's a whole new world going on. Towards the middle and the back, the people that were lying on the grass have been celebrating so much. There's a lot of beer on the ground there. It's been so peaceful in the middle right here. There were no negative reactions towards the president's visit here at all that I could see. In the back, there was an even different world going on. There was a bunch of beer tents and such bands. There were some 15 bands here, and they were playing off and on, and a lot of fun going on in the back. They really went all out for this occasion here.
Are there young people around there, or are they mostly adults? Do you see any youngsters?
They're very mixed. They're most of them, I would say, are, well, they are really mixed. There was, I suppose, mixed also as well as from all walks of life, what Rick had mentioned earlier. I noticed a couple Turks here, and but most are, it's very mixed.
They're here, Monty, up near the press center where the president's podium is. There's quite a number of young Berliners, mostly with their parents, who obviously have brought them up close to the front so they would get a chance to see the American president during his visit to Berlin. And almost to the number, each of the young people has at least an American flag or two that they have been waving, many of which, as you pointed out earlier, were in the newspaper this morning.
Mm-hmm. It has a picture of President Reagan on the back, and on the front of it there's, of course, the flag. But there's also a lot of other flags that are going around in here. I noticed a German-American friendship type flag that was waved towards the front in the sea of flags that was going on when the president was speaking here. I don't know what happened to that right now. Most of the flags are being waved, as a matter of fact, right now.
There's a large welcome banner for the president.
Yes.
There were two of those here a while back. No negative reaction at all that I've seen from back here yet.
Well, gentlemen, we are going to break away from you there at Charlottenburg Palace, and the president is heading off for Tempelhof Airport and Tempelhof Air Force facilities here where he's going to be taking off. And we'll get back to you possibly later, but in any event, we'll be getting out to Kyle King at Tempelhof Air Base, and that's coming up. You're listening to live coverage of President Ronald Reagan's visit to West Berlin on the American Forces radio and television service, originating from the American Forces Network in Berlin. Now, a check of the latest news from AP and UPI.
The Israeli cabinet has ordered its invasion forces in Lebanon to cease firing, effective at noon today. Now, Israeli troops won't fire unless they're fired upon. A cabinet statement says the ceasefire was ordered after Israel's goals were achieved. Cabinet Secretary Dan Meridor says Israel hopes there will be real peace between a free and independent Lebanon and the State of Israel. He also warns that any attempt by Syria to reintroduce surface-to-air missile batteries in Lebanon will draw immediate Israeli action. As the cabinet statement was issued, the Israeli military command announced 18 more Syrian combat planes were shot down over the eastern front in Lebanon, bringing to 79 the number of Syrian combat aircraft claimed by Israel in the 6 days of fighting. Israel has admitted losing one warplane and one combat helicopter. According to officials, West Berlin police rounded up 74 people and confiscated helmets, knives, and other weapons today at roadblocks set up in advance of President Reagan's visit. A police spokesman said most of those arrested would be released later today, hours after the president was scheduled to have departed for Bonn and Washington. The Alternative List, a leftist party in West Berlin, had called on people to defy a court ban on demonstrations during Reagan's visit and turn out for rallies against U.S. defense and foreign policy. Those detained today were held on suspicion of planning to join those demonstrations. The President and Mrs. Reagan flew from Bonn to West Berlin this morning, accompanied by West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt and American and West German cabinet officials. Meanwhile, in Bonn, 200,000 peace marchers gathered outside the hall housing the NATO summit meeting. Inside, President Reagan urged NATO allies to help encourage the Soviet Union to adopt what he termed a more cooperative spirit with other nations. The Soviets have rejected President Reagan's proposal for troop reductions in Europe. A commentary yesterday in the official news agency TASS said the disarmament proposal is aimed at damaging the security of the Soviet Union and its allies. Reagan made the troop reduction proposal Wednesday in his address to the West German parliament. The House finally passed the 1983 budget proposal yesterday. The Republican plan, backed by President Reagan, carries a $99 billion deficit and calls for cuts in social programs. It now goes to conference with the Senate. And finally, the National Governors Association says states should have the right to veto the location of a nuclear waste site. A spokesman told Congress only a vote by both houses should be able to overturn a state's decision. For AFN News, I'm Army Private Cambria Robinson.
Well, Berlin, being the city it is, has done a great deal of preparation for President Ronald Reagan's visit today. The president should remain at Charlottenburg Palace for just a bit longer, perhaps 10 to 15 more minutes, to enjoy some of the festivities going on out there today with the Volksfest, the Fest of the People, being thrown in his honor. Well, Berlin is a tourist attraction I mentioned before, and President Reagan and his party and those some 250 journalists with him will make up the 4 million people who will visit this city this year. It's one of the most popular tourist attractions in all of Europe. And the city publicity people claim that it is the biggest industrial city between Paris and Moscow. Well, what does this city behind the Iron Curtain in the middle of East Germany do? Industrially, it gets involved in building things like air conditioning cooling towers that go to the area of Persia. They build a synthetic packaging plant that goes to the United States. They have a power station they built for the government of South Korea and for the Soviet Union. They sent an electrical factory there. Those are just some of the things that are involved in Berlin industry, and an interesting fact is some of the conductors and things involved in the U.S. space program were actually made here in West Berlin. And another of those ties that we have between the Americans and the West Berliners. Also, Berlin is responsible for making about every third cigarette that is smoked in West Germany. About every third air conditioner that purifies the air in West Germany is also made here. There are a number of universities and institutions of higher learning here. The one university, Free University, was founded after the war when the city was divided into 4 sectors. Berlin University remained in what is now the Soviet sector. Free University was founded to replace that educational institution, and it is universities sought by West German residents who come here to live and attend the university here. Berlin, though, despite what you may have seen, if you see any of the publicity pictures of Berlin, you see a lot of skyscrapers and streets, and it looks all very modern. But Berlin is not a concrete jungle or a concrete desert. It resembles more of a green jungle from the air. West Berlin has numerous parks and green spaces, wooded areas, and places of recreation. We mentioned some of them before. About 2 million people live in the city. The 100 million trees in the forest around Berlin are the green lungs of the city. There's a great deal of industry that surrounds West Berlin, and those trees help to purify the air. There's nothing like a walk in the wonderful woods here. And American service people stationed in West Berlin enjoy it particularly because of all the wooded areas and the fad of running and jogging becoming as popular as it is today with our physical fitness craze, and the U.S. Army's emphasis on physical fitness more so now than in many years past, makes this a wonderful place to be for outdoor recreation and exercise and fresh air. There are very few cities, perhaps, in the world that possess the comprehensive museum collections that we find in West Berlin. And you can come here at various times of the year and find exhibits of art culture from various places, from Italy, from China, some priceless things that you can find on display in Berlin at the museums here. Berlin is a fun-loving city, too. There are amusement parks and restaurants, and the city streets come alive at nighttime, it seems. There are numerous people hustling and bustling around the shopping areas and the Kurfürstendamm, but at night people come out and enjoy the theater and the other aspects of culture that are available, the nightlife. Compared, though, with other cities of Europe, Berlin is a special case, being isolated in East Germany and having an eastern sector and our western sector. There's separate administrations, of course, for the Soviet sector in this one. And in 1961, the Berlin Wall went up, dividing the city even. The city is linked to West Germany, though, by water, by land, by air. Railway lines and highways and waterways pass between West Berlin and West Germany through the East German territory. And since the end of the war, the supreme authority in West Berlin, though, has rested with the powers, the three allied powers, and the agreement of September 3rd, 1971, endorsed the status of Berlin, and the same applies to the ties between the western sectors of West Berlin and the Federal Republic of West Germany. Well, there are various things you can say about Berlin. We talked about some of the economic things involved here and some of the cultural riches. Berlin is fast becoming a haven for musicians, and it seems as though the entertainment industry, particularly the film industry of Germany, bounces back and forth between West Berlin and places like Munich. The film industry is growing by leaps and bounds here, and an interesting aspect of the film, television, entertainment thing is the television series Dallas. People back in the United States have had Dallas for a while and have enjoyed it and have gotten hooked on it, I suppose. And the series came to West German television not too long ago. They prepare the soundtrack with German actors and actresses who do the German language version, and that whole thing is done here in West Berlin at a place called the Geier Film Studio that is left over from the 1930s, where some of the propaganda films of earlier years were produced. So Berlin has a lot to offer in the way of work and enjoyment and entertainment. Well, the government, according to its constitution, and we mentioned this a little bit earlier, the government of West Berlin is not really a city government. It's more like a state government, since Berlin is a land or a state. The governing mayor, Dr. Richard von Weizsäcker, and other members of the West Berlin Senate were elected in June of 1981. And their political party, the Christian Democratic Union, came into power for the first time since 1963. And that was kind of an upset, to say the least. Now, the Christian Democratic Union alone forms a minority government in the House of Representatives. Tempelhof Air Base that we talked about earlier, Tempelhof Airport by another name, and that's the place that you find a lot of activity for the United States Air Force in West Berlin. Civilian traffic began in 1951, but since then, as Berlin grew and things progressed, most of the commercial air traffic now going out of Tegel Airport. So all of those journalists who flew here from New York and Los Angeles and like places, they landed at Tempelhof Air Base with the president, but normally would have come in on the Tegel flight. From June 26, 1948 until September 1949, aircraft of the Western Allies supplied West Berlin, the western sectors of the city, with goods necessary to overcome the difficulties imposed by that Soviet blockade that was mentioned earlier. It seems as day and night, American, British, and French planes flew in and out and provided the city with what it needed. Checkpoint Charlie was another interesting place we talked about, and it has been a point of interest since the wall was erected in 1961. Brandenburg Gate was a place they talked about possibly as being a site for the president to visit other than Checkpoint Charlie. It was a toss-up. They were saying Brandenburg Gate, and then they were saying Checkpoint Charlie. Well, Brandenburg Gate is another spectacular tourist attraction in the city. A few meters from the western side, where the western sector ends and the eastern sector joins, well, beyond that is East Berlin. It's Brandenburg Gate. Not only a Berlin landmark, but also at the same time the symbol of the split of the powers of today, the East and West. And Brandenburg Gate goes back well over 200 years, and it's considered merely two gate columns crowned by figures in the top and trophies. In 1807, Napoleon got involved with the metropolis and the figures and the things in West Berlin. The four-horse chariot, the goddess of peace, was recreated in West Berlin after it was destroyed using the existing plaster impressions when it was first made in earlier years. In 1961, Passage to the eastern sector, such as the Brandenburg Gate, was closed off with concrete barriers. On November 20th, 1961, East German authorities erected that Berlin Wall. There is a lot to see in Berlin. John F. Kennedy Square. We all know about the Ich bin ein Berliner, the famous phrase that then President Kennedy uttered when he was here in Berlin. Well, November 25th, 1963, just 3 days after the president was murdered, the square in front of Schöneberg Rathaus, or the City Hall for West Berlin, was in the Schöneberg district, was renamed. It was renamed John F. Kennedy Square in a special memorial ceremony. And so the Berliners paid homage to the man in whom they had placed their hopes for the future. And of course, President Reagan came here today and hopefully reestablished that faith that the American people have. The Liberty Bell in the City Hall, Schöneberg Rathaus. Well, at 12 noon from the tower of Schöneberg Rathaus, the bells toll and make their sounds heard far and near all over the city. Every day at the 12 noon time for 31 years now, that Liberty Bell has rung in West Berlin. Oddly enough, but perhaps not so surprisingly, it's a copy of the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. It weighs 10 tons and bears an inscription that says that this world under God shall have a new birth of freedom. Well, the America House is another impression that we have left here in Berlin. The America House was first born back in February 1946 when a couple of soldiers appeared at what was then the U.S. Visa Office. They had some books under their arms, and it grew from there. The America House offering the folks in the city here a chance to go there and check out books and to be exposed to some of our American culture. Let's call in Rick Delisle again, who's still at the Palace, where there seems to be a bit of standing around, discussing and viewing the president.
Well, Monty?
Yes, Peter.
This is Peter DeLay. Rick Delisle has just sort of stepped back into the crowd at this time, and the crowd itself has moved from the front and has shifted all the way to where there is a big festival going on, from what I can see from here. Just about every band is playing at the same time, and there's a whole lot of hoopla going on. There's our 76th band was playing, Army band came up here from Kaiserslautern. They also had their small combo band come up with them. There's a small little 5-piece combo band, and they're really having a good time right here. It's very quiet up in the front. From the back door of the Charlottenburg Palace, I can see a couple dignitaries standing by. I suppose local West Berlin statesmen.
Meine Damen und Herren, wir möchten Sie darauf aufmerksam machen, dass für die Besucher, die den Park in Richtung Norden verlassen wollen, ein Ausgang über den Jungfernheideweg besteht. Danke.
Local officials directing the populace here. Most people are just sort of sitting around watching everybody else. It's very quiet on the grounds here right now, Monty. The press corps is all moved out. I believe they're inside speaking with the president and Mr. Haig. I can't see from this point right here. Everybody's inside. I believe they're already in on that massive cake.
Peter, it appears that the president's car is leaving the grounds, and we caught a glimpse of a helicopter sitting outside the gate of Charlottenburg Palace, and the motorcade that travels the short distance to get the president between one mode of transportation and another apparently is headed for the chopper. The president will board that and will chopper back to Tempelhof Air Base, where he will take off for return trip to Bonn, and we have a glimpse of the choppers lined up in a neat row there.
Several times during the speech of Mr. Reagan, there were some balloons that were up in the sky there. They were being guided, I suppose, by the wind, and what appeared like a rubber band that was guiding it sort of 45 degrees away from the wind, and it was making its direction over here at a consistent altitude. It was funny. A lot of the security officials on the roof here didn't know what to make out of it. Most people pointed at it. On one of them that went by over the lake area, it either said go or 60. I can remember it was backwards to from my field position here, and it just sort of drifted out over the horizon right there. on its own.
Well, the presidential party is boarding the chopper, and on our television monitor here in the AFN studio, we caught a glimpse of Ambassador Arthur Burns. We had the pleasure of interviewing him here in West Berlin when he came for a visit just after he was appointed the ambassador to West Germany. And Mrs. Reagan, we can see sitting in the helicopter, and there's the wild cheer and applause going up as the president leaves. He apparently has made one tremendous impression on the people of West Berlin, much as he did in his speech to the West German Bundestag earlier this week. So the chopper is there as the folks at Charlottenburg City Hall, at Charlottenburg Palace, Charlottenburg Palace are getting their final glimpse. Mr. Reagan, Mrs. Reagan, and the other American dignitaries and officials with them. The president will take off and return to Tempelhof Air Base. You can hear the wild cheers going up. Crowds. West Berlin police on hand for security. That palace is a beautiful place in summer or winter. I get the feeling that, for me, it looks much better in the summer. The trees and the park surrounding the park grounds, just absolutely beautiful. The blades of the chopper beginning to turn. You can hear it gearing up to take off to return the president for his departure. This has been an experience, I think, for all of us to have the president in our own city. It certainly has been one apparently enjoyed and appreciated by the German populace of West Berlin. For those of us who see the president only in videotape and news film on the 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock news, it's quite something to realize that he was here in our city to see those same sights and meet those same people who surround us every day. Camera work provided for this international coverage of the president's visit here has been superb. Radio coverage provided by the AFN Berlin news people. Video for our television audience being provided by German television. One chopper's in the air. I couldn't tell if that was the president's or one of the others with security folks, apparently security. It will only take a few minutes for them to get back to the Tempelhof Air Base area for the president to take off. Yes, Peter?
That was the president's helicopter that took off right there. The people now, all eyes are on the helicopters as they take off from the field here.
Okay. Back in the studio. Thanks, Peter. And we'll be getting back to Kyle King, Specialist King, and Airman Jerry Cormier. They are out at Tempelhof Air Base, and we'll be going out there just a bit later. We have one more thing that is kind of interesting. We've heard a lot about feelings toward the Americans, both good and bad, anti-Americanism in West Germany and in West Berlin. But you know, there's a lot of strong pro-American feeling, too, that's around us all the time. An examination of that subject from a West German perspective as Air Force Sergeant Kerry Campbell talks with members of the West German Army.
Officially, one often hears sincere claims about how welcome American troops are in Germany. Meanwhile, those same troops sometimes have trouble leaving a base or a caserne because of demonstrations. Once off, in many places, clubs won't let them in. To say the least, such conflicting signals can be confusing. Closely related or too hotly discussed issues in the German press: the peace movement and anti-Americanism. Both directly concern American soldiers, since it's a fact that the military isn't a beloved or even respected profession in some circles. Americans aren't the only ones to encounter animosity. German soldiers find it too.
Nicht gleich Anti-Amerikanismus ist.
The movement in Germany isn't absolutely anti-Americanism. There are, in fact, many people against all possible armies, but that doesn't automatically mean that they're only against Americans. They are consequently against a Soviet army and a growing German army. They are practically against the institution of the military.
The entire peace movement isn't a specific German problem. It exists in America, too. What's special about this situation in Germany is that the Federal Republic is a potential battleground. If there's war, it appears very probable it'll happen here. And therefore, naturally, the fear of the people is bigger than, say, someplace in Nepal.
The peace movement itself is a beautiful thing, and I find it good that it exists simply because it shows that in a democracy, one can have not only one opinion, but many. As it's now going, it isn't exactly as it should be. Everyone should be able to speak his mind. He can quietly demonstrate. But in the radical form that, at the moment, is prevalent, that is what pleases me the least. One can't easily speak for peace and pacifism if one doesn't observe it. One can't use radical or brutal forms to demonstrate.
It's been almost 3 decades since the Bundeswehr was created in Germany in the mid-1950s. After Germany's experience in World War II, there were then, as still today, some segments of German society that weren't happy to see their nation rearm. Memories of the war were too fresh. And that impact remains, even now.
In deutschen Schulen, wir sind immer noch sehr geschichtsbefangen. Ich selber verstehe es nicht.
In German schools, we're still very much prisoners of history. I don't understand it myself. Since 1945, National Socialism was ended. I was born in 1959, and I didn't have anything to do with National Socialism. But today, the after effects of history remain. That means that in our schools, something that relates to the state, and what that means is serving the country, the draft, and so on, such things aren't defended.
Here in the peace movement, a complete group of young people let themselves be used from leftist, progressive, and aggressive groups in the population. Then, rightly in part, have been inspired by humanism. They believe they're doing something good, but they let themselves wind up someplace they don't want to go and don't have any idea where it will end up.
Popular song of the movement remains John Lennon's Give Peace a Chance. Of the German soldiers we talked to during a joint German-American exercise, most thought that NATO has done just that over the years by helping keep the peace and giving it a chance to continue in Europe. Air Force Sergeant Kerry Campbell, EBS News, Darmstadt, West Germany.
We are back now with our transmission from Tempelhof Air Base.
Well, Monty, here it.
Yes, Kyle.
Monty, the scene is much different than it was earlier. There were, as you know, about 4,000 people out here to greet the president. Now, of course, the crowds have gone, and all that remain are strong reporters, the security people, the 3 helicopters are landing now. I'm standing here with Jerry Cormier and the reporters that are inside the building here. They're all feverishly filing their reports to be satellited back to the United States, of course, from this historic trip to the city of Berlin. And here at Tempelhof now, the president has arrived. The helicopters are touching down. There's another one landing. And I'm going to ask Jerry what he thinks about the president's trip and what it's been like out here covering it from the press boxes.
Well, it's been really crazy back here, Kyle. People running back and forth, all the major networks and their reporters getting their stuff together, sending it back to the States for broadcast tonight. The crowd outside today was really enthusiastic as the president greeted them and spoke with them. And it's been a very good day for the president and Mrs. Reagan.
Of course, the scene here now is so much different. Earlier, as those of you that were listening know, battalions from the 6th Infantry were out here standing at attention, greeting the president. There were representatives from the Air Force, of course, representatives from the Army. The Berlin Brigade drill team was on hand as color guard. The 298th Army Band played for the president earlier. Now all those elements from the president's visit are gone, and reporters are now standing by, ready to film the exit of the president from the helicopter, and security people are getting off the other helicopters now. There's a flurry of air activity here. The president's plane has been standing by and
He's ready to board now, it appears. It seems as though this historic trip to West Berlin is just about to a close. And some of the dignitaries that were here earlier were, of course, the commanders of all the Allied forces here in the city, the Berlin Brigade commander, the commander of the U.S. Army and Community commander. And, of course, Jerry, those reporters, they were noticing something on their monitors here before that we haven't had much coverage of, which was some demonstrations downtown. Apparently, the president was not even aware that they were going on. It's something that'll probably be reported on later, although the trip itself appears from where I was standing to have gone perfectly well.
The security was very tight, and that had a lot to do with the smoothness of things. The president didn't witness any violence, although the demonstrations downtown seemed to be very violent. And as far as the Berliners that came out to greet the president, there seemed to be no ill feelings towards Americans or towards the president and his policies.
The main thing I noticed here when the president was passing by the troops was how anxious everybody was, and of course that historic moment when he went and shook the hands of the soldiers and the families here, something that everybody had waited for, and it all paid off because the president surely took his time as he was wading through the crowd. And the people here, of course, so glad to see him, and he spoke directly to them as he stopped here at Tempelhof. The purpose of his speech here was to reassure the soldiers and their families that his support and the support in the United States would continue for the soldiers. He made reference to the passage of the budget in the House and Senate at this point, and he said that conferees are now working on a final budget that will, of course, as he said, include increased and steady support for the U.S. military, which was, of course, a reassurance to the people here in West Berlin, because we are, as most people know, behind the Iron Curtain within East Berlin in the city of West Berlin. It's sort of an unusual situation. He spoke referring to that fact for the soldiers here, calling it the edge of freedom. And it now appears most of the helicopters have landed. There's one final chopper being guided in at this point as Air Force One is standing by, and another United States of America plane is sitting by off to the left, we assume, for reporters and for the entourage that follows the president and his wife on these trips. Of course, it's been a trip for the president to remember, but not, of course, the first time that a president has been here, as everybody knows. And Jerry has maybe some information about other presidents that have been here.
Well, Kyle, as President Reagan wraps up his visit to Berlin, he joins a list of 5 other U.S. presidents that have visited the city, actually 6. President Truman visited Berlin in the mid-'60s. However, he wasn't president at that time, obviously. President Eisenhower was here in 1959, and of course John Kennedy in 1963.
With his famous Ich bin ein Berliner statement that we've heard so much of today.
And President Johnson was here in April of 1967 to attend Konrad Adenauer's funeral. He was the first chancellor of the Federal Republic. President Nixon was here in 1969, and President Carter was here in 1978.
Well, Jerry, it appears from where I can see that all the helicopters have landed now, and there seems to be a gathering around the red carpet that leads to the steps that go up to Air Force One, and we expect President Reagan and his wife Nancy will be boarding soon. The entourage is apparently also ready and anxious to get back. I saw some tired reporters. I noticed ABC's Ann Compton over there furiously filing some reports to get ready to satellite back to the United States so the folks there can see live and extensive coverage of the president's trip, which began 10 days ago. It's taken him from France, where he went to a splendid and spectacular meeting with the economic leaders of the Western powers. Then from there, of course, to Italy, where he met with Pope John Paul and Italian officials. Then on to England, where he met with Prime Minister Thatcher, and of course the Queen and her husband. And then, of course, on to Bonn, West Germany, where he delivered a powerful speech to the Bundestag and reinforced America's commitment to its allies in Europe, which, of course, heartily greeted with many applause from the Bundestag, and then here in West Berlin on the last leg of his tour, although he will make one more stop in Bonn before flying back to Washington. And
you know, Kyle, it's really amazing when you think of all the traveling that Mr. and Mrs. Reagan have done in the past 10 days. They've kept a schedule that would wear most people out in 2 days, and they've been doing it for 10.
As I saw the president earlier when he was shaking hands and greeting the American community here, he looks probably chipper and more fit than many of the reporters that have been following him.
Yes, he certainly does, Kyle. This sort of event, coming to Europe and meeting with the Allies and seeing the American troops, they're waving goodbye now as they board the plane. It's been a very positive experience.
I noticed the president now and his entourage are starting to board the plane, the whine of the engines, although you can't hear them from inside the press box here. It appears now that the president has gone up the ramp. He's inside the plane, and he'll be departing in just a few minutes. The press is starting to walk off the field in some areas, and the other plane has still not been boarded yet. I see another plane from the U.S. of A., presidential plane now taxiing out to the runway, although the president's plane hasn't moved yet. Some people are now walking off the field. And it looks like this historic trip by our Commander-in-Chief, President Ronald Reagan, is drawing to a close here at Tempelhof Air Base. Jerry, do you have any final observations?
Well, Kyle, as I said before, President Reagan was warmly received, and I think that it did the American community a lot of good for him to come out and talk to him, and it did President Reagan a lot of good to see just how we're serving here.
Well, he certainly was smiling, and he smiled to hundreds and hundreds of children who pushed to the front of that crowd that was here earlier. Of course, everybody in the Berlin community, the Americans in the Berlin community, got the day off. The commanding general of the city decided to make it an official holiday for the folks that live and work in this city, so they could come out here and give the president a good greeting, and that they did. It was a fine turnout. There was several thousand people out here, including uniformed personnel, their families, American civilians working for the military and the civilians. There were many people out here from all walks of life, it seemed, and everybody got a chance to get a good first-hand view of the president, who's now inside Air Force One. They've taken away the loading ramp, and the plane's engines are now winding up. It appears that the president will be pulling out of Tempelhof Air Base from this historic trip to West Berlin at any moment now. Kyle, most of the crowd has moved back. The crowd of reporters has moved back to the stands, and everybody's waiting to wave goodbye to the president.
Kyle, can you hear me, or are you overwhelmed by the noise?
We can hear you, Monty.
Are people still hanging around to see the president off like they were for his arrival?
Most of it now is just press. The crowd that was here before of military and dependents and civilians was dispersed shortly after the president left, and a few die-hard press folks are still standing out there on the stand, having their cameras winding away, and getting the few last pictures before the president leaves.
Well, you know, those military people and folks living here in Berlin are seeing this live, but the coverage was not aired, at least by ABC, CBS, or NBC. I know they did not air it live. They sent back reports to New York or Los Angeles for packaging, as they call it. A couple of the networks are carrying this departure thing on the morning shows because it's early morning back home, and the Today Show and Good Morning America, I believe, both were carrying the departure, but the rest of it was not seen live, at least on the three commercial networks back home. Cable news network may have carried it live, but the other three did not. So here in Berlin, we were able to see it as it happened.
Well, we certainly were lucky in that respect because the coverage has been outstanding from what I've seen. Of course, we've been covering it here on radio and occasionally getting a glimpse of the monitors from the television pool, as they call it out here, where all the networks share the same coverage from the two cameras that have been mounted out here at Tempelhof Air Base. And as we look out the window now, we can see the plane is taxiing out to the runway. One U.S. plane has taken off. We assume that was with support people and security personnel that We're here just to support the trip. Those planes will probably be going back to Bonn for a brief stopover and then back to the United States, where a chipper but probably tired President Reagan and his wife will be doing some resting after this visit to West Berlin and Europe itself.
But you know, he never looks tired. That's the amazing thing. You know, Mr. Reagan seems to go on and on and on, and he does so much that he always has a wonderful mood about him. He looks rested and is alert and eager and just a warm person. He makes a tremendous impression on people.
Well, he certainly made a tremendous impression on everybody out here, because people were pensive at first. They were waiting and waiting and waiting because it's such a historic thing. Perhaps they thought maybe it was a little too good to be true that they would be seeing somebody live and close up like that. And as he got off the plane, it was immediately apparent that he was glad to be here. He had a big smile on his face. His wife was waving happily, and it just it was picture postcard perfect. Photographers, of course, snapping away, and now the plane is taxiing out to the runway, and the trip is just about over, although there are still some reporters outside on the area where the press coverage has come from, and there are reporters, of course, running frantically down the hallways here. Reporters from ABC, CBS, and Cable News Network all running around like trying to get things as quickly as they can sent back to the States, where it's, of course, early in the morning yet, and there are people back there will be anxious.
Yes, Kyle, we are going to leave you, gentlemen. Apparently our video coverage is finished, and so we only have a couple of things to do to conclude it here, and that's to wrap it up. That's the main one. Our reporters on this live coverage from West Berlin of the visit by President Ronald Reagan have been Specialist 4 Kyle King, Airman First Class Jerry Cormier, Specialist 4 Peter Dole, Technical Sergeant Rick Delisle, and Private Cambria Robinson in the studio. I'm Army Sergeant Monty Jones. You've been watching live coverage of the President's visit to West Berlin on the American Forces Radio and Television Service. And this is the American Forces Network, Europe.